But for the record, follow-up thought immediately after that was maybe he was referring to his size, scaring Aelin off. But I don't know. What did you think?
I think that this made me laugh so hard. I had to go in the other room so I didn't wake up my husband.
Welcome back to the Booked on Fantasy podcast.
I'm Addison.
I'm Lorraine, and we are two best friends who explore the world of fantasy through book shows and movies, but with a heavy emphasis on books. We're just going to jump straight into it today because I don't have words for this set of chapters. It was crazy, and we have a lot to talk about. So without further ado, as a quick reminder, we will be discussing chapters 30 through 37 specifically, but there will definitely be spoilers for all the books we've covered so far. This includes The Assassin's Blade, Throne of Glass, Crown of Midnight, Heir of Fire, and Queen of Shadows. Otherwise, the series is brand new to us, so you won't be getting any spoilers for the rest of the series. Furthermore, we would like to remind everyone that this is an adult podcast where we will have adult conversations. Explicit language or potentially triggering topics may be discussed, so please be mindful of that and adjust accordingly. Housekeeping. Our next Empire of Storms episode will cover chapters 38 through 42. Second, if you need to fill the time between our Empire of Storms coverage, then we have now released our second Paging the Past episode for Book 2 in the Hunger Games trilogy, Catching Fire. If you are unfamiliar, our Paging the Past episodes will be monthly book reviews to revisit our favorite series from the past, such as Harry Potter, Twilight, and more. Additionally, if you've started your Empyrean series journey, then we did cover Onyx Storm, so that is available as well. Last but not least, we have gotten some more reviews in recently. We got so excited. So that we reminded them of Fantasy Fangirls, and we were like, what? Literally, that was crazy to read. I had a moment where I was like, is this real? Pinch me, Addison. Is this real? I don't know. Thank you guys so much for tuning in every week and taking the time to leave us a review. We will continue to ride the high of reviews from this week for probably forever.
And not just for the reviews, but also thank you for taking the time to rate the podcast. Before we started the podcast, I had absolutely no idea what it all meant. But anytime we get ratings or reviews, it boosts the podcast on the top 200 charts. That makes it easier for people to find the podcast, which means we can grow our book club community, which is pretty much our dream. So thank you so much for taking the time to rate as well. Also, the recent review we got that was titled Chef's Kiss Coverage. I literally love you, and your review was Chef's Kiss. So thank you guys for that.
All right, so that is all for housekeeping. So let's get into the episode. We will start with the book report for chapter summaries, and then we'll dive into an analysis and our theories for each chapter. And finally, we will share our favorite moments. With that being said, Addison, please give us the book report.
Happily. Chapter 30. Aelin and Lorcan set out into a copse of trees together to gather wood for a fire, and Lorcan begins questioning Aelin again about the dungeons of Morath. But they'd finally come to the point where it was too difficult, too traumatizing for Aelin to relive those cold, dark days in the dungeon. So she refused to answer. An angry Lorcan began to demand answers, but sensed the shift in Aelin from stubbornness and defiance to sorrow and hopelessness. Lorcan decides to back off and try a new strategy, kill him with kindness. When they get back to camp, it's good news. The ground is dry enough so the young married couple can get a night together in their own private tent. Wink, wink. In an attempt at kindness, Lorcan brings Aelin hot water for a bath, washes her clothes, and brings her dinner. The kindness prompts Aelin to share with Lorcan about her uncle Vernon and what he did to her. And our shadow daddy Lorcan offers to kill him when he gets to Morath. Chapter 31. Aelin and Rowan could have just used the door, but where would the fun have been in that? Instead, they let themselves into Fenris and Gavriel's room through their window. They then had a lengthy conversation where they discussed the differences in how Aelin's split oath worked versus Maeve's split oath with the rest of the cadre. They then discussed Maeve's plans and whether she was on her way to help Erawan or hurt him. Lastly, Gavriel informed Aelin and Rowan that Rolfe would be receiving a special shipment of weapons for the southern continent called Fire Lances. Aelin thanked them for the information and headed for the rooftops of Skulls Bay, where Rowan all but declared his undying love for Aelin, and the two had a steamy makeout session in the moonlight. But that's it. Nothing else. Chapter 32. Aelin tossed and turned, but sleep would not find him. He could not stop thinking about meeting his father for the first time, and so he got dressed and prepared to meet his father. Until Lysandra pumped the brakes because, is that really what he was going to wear? As much as I adore Lysandra, how dare she interrupt Aelin and Rowan's sexy time just to get Aelin some clothes? Aelin, who looked quite dashing, by the way, and Lysandra head to Rolfe's Inn where Aelin met Gabriel, the lion incarnate. But if you thought they were going to toss the old baseball around and then go out for pizza and ice cream, you were sorely mistaken. Instead, Aelin was overtaken by anger at Gabriel for how his mother was treated and perished so young. The meeting was over as quickly as it started, and Aelin headed toward the mountainside looking for a space to clear his head, where Lysandra reminded him that he was worthy. Later on, Aelin stormed into Rolfe's tavern and was caught off guard when she saw an updated war map that made her blood run cold. Erawan had positioned his army so that aid to the north was now impossible, and they were poised to strike Eelway. Chapter 33. They all stand in stunned silence as they digest the news about Erawan's fleet, and Aelin realizes Erawan is attacking Eelway to send her a message. She stares at the map, and her gaze snags on Briarcliff in the Red Desert, the home of the silent assassins. Foreshadowing. Anyways, Aelin tries to give Rolfe the business on how things are going to go down, but he laughs and refuses, and so Aelin switches to plan B. She releases a tendril of magic, and shortly thereafter, the alarm bells begin ringing. A small fleet of Valg soldiers were coming straight for Skull's Bay. Aelin bids Rolfe a farewell and wishes him luck against the Valg. A desperate Rolfe quickly negotiates terms and agrees to join Aelin's cause. Aelin and Rolfe begin giving orders, and Aelin prepared herself to sail right into the heart of the enemy fleet and blow them all out of the water. Chapter 34. Aelin Galanthinius was a liar and a murderer and a thief, and she had a feeling she'd be called much worse by the end of this war. But there was no time to dwell on what she'd just done. The Valg were coming, but she was a force of nature, a calamity, and a commander of immortal warriors of legend. Aelin and the cadre made their way into Rolfe's ship, and Aelin told Lysandra it was time. Lysandra jumped into the sea and transformed. She grew, and when she emerged, she had jade green scales. She was a sea dragon. Aelin next ordered Rolfe's men to anchor the chains to the mast. She then offered a prayer to Themis to keep the shifter swift and unfaltering beneath the waves. Lysandra prepared herself for the fight to come. She knew she would have to unleash every wild instinct, yielding the part of her that felt and cared. Lysandra dug her talons into the reef shelf and peered into the silent blue stretching endlessly ahead. And so she began her death vigil. Chapter 35. Aelin and Rowan prepared, slicing their palms to ignite their Karanon bond. Aelin began tunneling down into her magic, down, all while merging her power with Rowan. Her flames erupted in a pillar of fire so spectacularly vast, it was a maelstrom of death and life and rebirth. But the power came at a terrible price. Aelin was wearing a wyrdkey, and when Rowan looked into Aelin's eyes, it was not his queen who gazed back, but instead Deanna, the goddess of the hunt. She had taken Aelin's power and turned it into something much darker. Not wildfire, but moonfire. Deanna prepared to unleash her power not on the Valg fleet, but instead the innocents in Skull's Bay. It was only seeing Rowan throw himself in front of that power that gave Aelin the strength to grab Deanna by the throat and seal her back behind the hole she came through. Aelin only had seconds to throw her body sideways before the power Deanna held unleashed. Chapter 36. Aelin was floating in the water, fighting to reorient herself, to process everything that had just occurred. Thank God for Fenris, who used his teleportation magic to get Aelin to the safety of the coral shelf. Though they had survived Deanna and the blasty blast of Aelin's magic, they weren't out of danger yet, because danger still lurked beneath the surface. Lysandra did not know what the fuck happened about the surface. She only knew she needed to take out those 2 sea wyvern and the 3 remaining Valg ships. Using some truly vicious and clever maneuvering, Lysandra managed to take out both sea wyverns and 2 of the remaining ships. But the danger was far from over. She heard Aelin screaming one word over and over again: swim. Lysandra gazed at the open water where she saw 3 massive forms raging through the waves, aiming right for her. Chapter 37. Aelin watched with horror from the watchtower above. 1 warship and 3 sea wyverns versus 1 sea dragon. The sentry next to Aelin began chanting, oh shit, and boy was he right. Lysandra cunningly tricked the first sea wyvern into impaling itself and sinking the last Valg ship, and in an intense and action-packed sequence used the help of Dorian's magic and Aedian's crossbow to kill the remaining two. Lysandra swam to the beach and Aedian ran like hell to get to her. Knowing he needed to help bring back the woman inside the sea dragon, Aedian made Lysandra a promise that one day he would marry her. Princess Lysandra Ashriver did have a nice ring to it after all. Aelin and the cadre appear and Aedian sends them off to deal with the fallout while he waited for hours for Lysandra to have enough strength to shift back. When she finally did, he carried her back to the inn. As Aedian carried his future wife, his father watched on with longing and despair. He wondered to himself if his son would ever allow the world to know who had sired him, or even care. And that was a really depressing way to conclude the book report. Sorry, guys.
Oh my gosh. So crazy.
Literally
Thank
so
you
crazy.
For those great summaries. And now, of course, without further ado, let's get into the episode, starting with our overarching thoughts.
So I wrote wow like 60 times to begin our notes. This set of chapters completely caught me off guard. I did not expect them to be so monumental. So here are just some quick things I need to get off my chest before we start. Number one, we were right about Rolfe, and that feels great. Okay, just gotta put that out there. Number two, you guys know I have been harboring an ever-growing mistrust of the gods, and this chapter confirms I was right to feel that way. That also feels great, but also not so much at the same time. So I'll still take the W on that, but everybody else had to take the L. And lastly, this will probably not come as a shock to those of you who have been listening for a while, but I have another unpopular opinion to share. I think that what Aelin did in this set of chapters was pretty fucked up, honestly. I don't really buy the whole the ends justify the means argument. What Aelin did was very risky and honestly felt like the nuclear option, and I just feel she could have exhausted other options before resorting to this particular plan. We, of course, will be discussing this in depth in the episode, but I wanted to give you a heads up so you can prepare to mentally argue with me in the shower or in your car, wherever you listen to the podcast. So go ahead and prepare your arguments. And if you would still like to argue with me in real life, just go ahead and DM me. I'll be happy to keyboard warrior.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like there had to be a different way for Aelin to do something at this point. I mean, I understand that her and Rolfe don't really get along, and like maybe she needed to demystify the myth of Aelin Galathinius and the sea dragons. You had to do something really, really big in order to convey that message, I guess. But simultaneously, I'm like, no.
This
like,
is your only option to summon 1,000 Valg and then risk Lysandra. Yeah. And I mean, of course, she couldn't have predicted the Deanna thing, but you also risked the very small fleet and crew that Rolfe has. So I'm like, what are you doing? This is a waste of very valuable resources. Not for nothing, but like, she's just learned that Erawan has cut off aid to the north and poised himself to attack Eelway. And so you think sinking 8 of his ships and killing like 1,000 of his men is going to help your case? If you're trying to prompt him to attack Eelway, I mean, you did it.
I think a lot of it was ultimately unintentional, of course, but I think the risk should have been much more heavily considered before she went the route that she did.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like obviously no one could have known that it would have played out how it did. And I don't think she was thinking about that either. But yeah, anyways, we'll talk about it as we get
We're going to talk about it.
But
Okay.
overall, I thought this was the most exciting set of chapters to date. We had all this action and then the emotion of thinking Lysandra was going to die, the world expansion with Erawan and Maeve's forces, the cadre, all of Erawan's creatures. It was just super crazy. I cried, I laughed, and I lived my way through these chapters. And by the end, I think I need to sign up for some therapy.
Oh, yes. Yep.
But I will say I am anticipating a wild second half of the book, though, because I feel like typically with SGM books, you get that last 100-page sprint. But since the sprint is starting early, you know it's only going to get more intense from here. And I was like, oh my God, we have like half a book to go. So,
Lorraine, don't say that. I'm not equipped for that. Okay.
I will say it. So you can prepare yourself.
I don't think I can do this, Lorraine.
You can. And
I don't know, man. That was a lot for only chapters 30 through 37.
Well, if Lysandra can outmaneuver 5 sea wyverns, then you can read these chapters.
That's very sweet of you to think that I have even a fraction of Lysandra's abilities. Okay.
All right. So that ends our overarching thoughts. And without further ado, let's get into the chapters, starting with chapter 30.
It has been 2 weeks since Aelin and Lorcan paired up with old Money Eyes Molly and her carnival troupe, and Aelin ain't having any fun. Aelin spent her days trying to avoid Umbriel, who I do not trust at all for no reason, just vibes, and who was always asking her questions about her pretend husband Lorcan.
My eyes and ears were perked at the mentioning of sleeping situations, even if it's because they were avoided for now between her and her husband, gods above. But I thought it was funny that it said Lorcan somehow always got the short straw. Just because I feel like it was definitely intentional, because Lorcan is this huge hulking man, so I'm sure Nick was like, hell yeah, you can take security. Why would I do it when you can, you know?
Yeah. The caravan stops for the evening, and Aelin and Lorcan set off into the woods to collect firewood, as had been their habit for the past 2 weeks. And Lorcan uses this time to question Aelin about the layout of Morath, the witches, and pretty much everything else in between. Lorcan then questions Aelin about what was inside of the dungeons in the sublevels, and Aelin lies and says she doesn't know. We know, of course, that this is where Vernon kept Aelin for a week before Manon and the 13 rescued her, and then Lady Keltane blew the roof off of Morath. It's clear to me that Aelin doesn't want to discuss this with Lorcan because she almost certainly has some PTSD from the whole thing. But Lorcan, I think, can sense Aelin is holding back because he says, "You described everything with no problem, yet your scent changed just now. Why?" As a quick side note, this is a commentary on all fantasy books where fae have a heightened sense of smell, not just a criticism of Thornaglass. But most of the time, it really cracks me up, or it kind of gives me the ick when they use people's scent to discern things.
Yes.
Usually, it's when Aedian's like, God's above. He could scent the lust between Aelin and Rowan. But that's just kind of gross. You know what I mean?
It's just weird to know that everybody can know everything about what you've been up to just by smelling you. Like, there's no secrecy. And I'm like, I didn't want you to know any of that. And yet, yeah, it's weird.
Well, like, sometimes Rowan will think he didn't even want to contemplate what Aedian could scent coming off of him and Aelin. And I'm like, ew. When you think about it too hard,
TMI.
It's not good.
TMI.
TMI. Honestly, even in this situation, it's weird, but also funny that his response was, "I smell your fear. Why are you lying?" And she was just like,
Get out of my face. You could go to hell.
That's right.
Totally agree. I kind of just ignored the whole smelling thing unless there's some like theorizing to be done about it, because the general use case for it is just awkward and I don't want to think about it too hard because then it gets real weird real fast. But aside from that, I totally agree that Aelin is still haunted from her time in Morath, both in terms of what she saw and what she endured. I also feel like Aelin is scared to be left alone, and we see more thoughts in relation to that shortly. I really think Aelin has grown to almost like Lorcan's company in a weird way, while also reconciling his presence with the fact that he, like everyone else, is only there for a transactional exchange for now. I still think he's going to change his mind. So I guess we'll see about that.
Of course he is.
Can't leave his wife
That's his
behind.
wife.
I know. I also found it interesting that he asked specifically about the northern dungeon, and maybe it's nothing, but I did wonder if he's trying to inquire about something specific going on there. Or if he knows more information from, questioning the witches that he'd caught. And so that's why he's like wanting to know specifically about that place. But again, it could just be because it's the last part that he hasn't heard about yet. So he just wants to know.
Yeah.
So who knows?
Also, Lorcan seems pretty meticulous. So it seems like he'd want to know every square inch, whether he intends to go there or not. Plus, I mean, Morath is a huge place where Erawan lives. So I'd probably want to know every single detail as well, so I could have plans within plans. Aelin tries to redirect the conversation back to how Lorcan will leave as soon as Aelin is done describing the dungeons. And Lorcan is basically like, yep, that was our deal. So I will definitely be doing that. Aelin admits that most of the dungeons and catacombs are now gone, but then decides she has told Lorcan enough and she was tired of reliving her days in Morath. She tells Lorcan to figure it out himself. Lorcan is obviously displeased to hear this, and I thought it was interesting how it's described that the environment seems to change and react with Lorcan's mood. It's described, even the wind in the grass has died down. And when Lorcan is standing before a lead, it says, even the sun seemed to avoid the broad plains of his tan face. And I noted this because we've talked about Lorcan's power before, and it seems like it was gifted by the dark god Hellas himself. I would imagine that the sun doesn't shine on the dark god either. I mean, he's quite literally called the dark god. So I just thought that that was interesting that even environmentally speaking, that still aligns with his power. And I don't know, I'm all about the gods now. I'm like the rain, okay?
Exactly. Welcome to the side of Ring. No, I am really excited to see more about what Lorcan's power can do. It's always described as being like death itself, but I need more explicit examples of what it actually does. I guess like life itself just stops around him and, well, maybe it dies. I don't know, but it stops. Thinking more about God to character connections, I do wonder why Lorcan? Like, why did Hellas gift Lorcan with his magic if he is supposedly just a bastard son? You know what I mean? Like,
well, you know why,
don't
about? You? Because Hellas is his daddy, obviously.
You think so?
Honestly, yeah, I do. Knowing that Mala, well, we'd obviously not 100% confirmed, but knowing that Mala and Brannon got together and conceived a child makes me feel like it opens the door for other gods to mate with humans.
That's true,
and or fae to birth a child. So I really do.
Yeah, I could see that, I guess, as we're talking about it. But anyways, also just as a random thought, I do wonder how all the different gods in this world feel about each other. Do they all get along? Do they all have their own agendas? Do they work together in any capacity? Freaking Deanna's little scheme definitely seems to imply they're not afraid to come and fuck shit up for everyone. So what is the rapport between all the gods, I guess? Just a question to keep in mind.
That's an excellent question. My gut reaction is that they do not all have the same agenda. I'm going to go ahead and say that now. Based on Deanna's crazy ass, I'm going to think no.
Yeah, that's fair.
Lorcan reminds the lead that they have a bargain, but our clever girl doesn't back down. She tells Lorcan, you did not specify when I had to tell you, so I may take as much time as I wish to recall details if you desire to wring every last one of them from me. And I gotta say, a lead got him there. You know, it's very common in fantasy books when there's fae involved that they're always like, be careful, they're tricky with their words. And we see that come into play a little bit in the last set of chapters when Rowan was talking to Gavriel and Fenris about Maeve's commands and how they could maneuver around them. And so I'm honestly a little surprised that Lorcan wasn't more specific with the terms of the bargain, especially because he knows how clever she is. So I don't know. I thought that was kind of an error on Lorcan's part to underestimate a lead and her cunningness and everything. But Lorcan honestly really has no recourse here. He can't kill her because he won't get any answers. And even if he tried to torture them out of her, I kind of feel like a lead is a character that would hold out way longer than you think because she's just already endured so much pain and suffering in her life that she would be able to withstand it. And also, I feel like she would just refuse to tell him out of spite. Like, she would hold that in for so long just to be like, fuck you, Lorcan.
Right. Yeah, Aelin Lorcanoff is, I think, my new favorite show. When she thinks he could go to hell. That was so funny to me. But I also think it's funny because technically, if Lorcan's magic is from Hellas, then he'd probably feel right at home there. So is it really a punishment? I don't know. But I agree that there isn't really a point to killing a lead off. Not because he couldn't get answers, but I think more so because it would take too long to find another source who could. And a lead seems to be like the simplest path to getting the info he needs. So she right.
Lorcan grabs Elite's elbow and Elite immediately demands that Lorcan take his hands off of her, and to her surprise, he does so immediately. We know Lorcan has tortured and killed and quite literally destroyed kingdoms, and I appreciate that even he has boundaries and limitations, especially when it comes to women. There have been a few times where, based on what Elite says or does, he wonders if she had been assaulted or he can infer that something has happened to her negatively, and each time he gets really angry at the thought of someone doing that to a lead, which I think actually says a lot about his morals in a good way. I know that Lorcan is really meant to be like morally gray, and there's like this undercurrent of how he treats Aelin and Rowan that we're not supposed to like, but he's a softie on the inside. I just know he is, at least for a lead.
I would say Lorcan is definitely growing a teeny dark heart for a lead. So I'm very excited about this. I also found it notable that right after this, the wyrdkey Elite has in her pocket begins to thrum and beat a phantom heartbeat in her bones. And Lorcan, of course, immediately senses this energy, though he thinks it's still something about a lead. First of all, I think the wyrdkey continues to protect a lead like it did with the Ilkin. And now that I think more about it, it kind of reminds me of the Eye of Aelin intuitively protecting Chaol in Queen of Shadows for his bravery as well. I still would really like to know if Elite has any sort of magic thanks to her Blackbeak lineage, but since it doesn't seem like she does yet, I don't feel like it's the wyrdkey responding to her magic at this time. I know we've kind of like touched on this before. On the other hand, you could read that the other way and say maybe that's exactly why it does respond to a lead, because she does have magic, it just hasn't fully manifested yet. I guess TBD on that, but it's still something that plagues my thoughts.
I know we're really starting to split hairs here on this, but maybe you can have magic in your blood, but just traces of it. So not enough to manifest any kind of meaningful power, but enough that a powerful magical object like a wyrdkey can sense it. And so that's why it's interacting with the lead in that way. But same,
True.
I don't know, TBD.
Second, I do think it's kind of funny just to think Lorcan at this time thinks a lead is some magical force because he's like, what are you? And it's going to be very funny when he realizes he's been getting told off by just like an ordinary 18-year-old girl. Like that is all, you know?
I cannot wait until he finds out she's been carrying a fucking wyrdkey this entire time. I bet he'll be like, God's above.
God's above.
He's going to be so mad. He's going to be so mad at himself. Oh my God.
So once Lorcan asked why she wishes to find Aelin Galathinius, I got a bit emotional when this causes a lead to reflect on the transactional nature of their relationship right now. Before getting into a lead's emotional state, I love that she catches Lorcan's slip up because a lead lock-in ain't watched over by Aneth for nothing.
After this set of chapters, I'm pretty mad at all the gods and also mistrustful. But so far, Aneth hasn't done us dirty. So for now, hashtag thanks, Aneth. We'll stick with that.
Yeah. This conversation does, however, make it abundantly clear to her that Lorcan's hidden agenda is his priority because she thinks, would this be her life then? Wretched people always looking out for themselves, every kindness coming at a cost. Would her own queen at least gaze at her with warmth in her eyes? She couldn't remember the last time she'd been held or comforted or smiled at with any genuine love for who she was. And my heart broke for her because all a lead really wants from someone is genuine kindness and love. She's been locked up and used for so long that she craves having someone in her life who cares for her without any sort of hidden agenda or reason other than that because they love her. And I think due to what she's experienced, Elite is worried that without something of value to offer Aelin or anyone she encounters in general, she won't find her worthy of keeping around, which is really sad.
Okay, well, this was heartbreaking to read and heartbreaking to listen to. Thanks a lot, Lorraine. But I think this quote specifically speaks to her and what really drives her character. Oftentimes, she thinks she's going on this journey, so no girl will ever be forgotten in a tower or locked away and forgotten. And she uses language like this a lot. And I think this really emphasizes that her ultimate goal is for no one to have to suffer the way that she has. And honestly, that just kind of fucks me up. It makes me love a lead and it fucks me up.
I know. I do really admire Elie's loyalty anyway, because she thinks she'd wash the queen's clothes if she had to. At least she didn't need to be literate for that. I was like, I can't read and I have no map.
Okay. This is so bad. And I'm going to tell myself before I even say it. I'm only making fun of this because it is quite literally the perfect combination of two of Lorraine and I's favorite jokes about this series. Elite thinks she couldn't even read God's Above. And when I read this, I was laughing so hard. I was wheezing because you guys know how we feel about God's Above. And then back at the end of Queen of Shadows, after Manon drops Elite off, and Elite's like, but I can't read and I have no map. And Manon just pieces out and is like, meh, oh well, you'll be fine. Stay off the roads. And so the marriage of those two jokes just had me on the floor. I just couldn't take it. And so it's like, God's above. She couldn't even read.
Maybe Lorcan will teach her how to read. Nice.
Oh my God. I would love that. Oh. Yes, sign me up. That also seems romantic as hell.
I know. Anyways, I do really like the humorous aspect of Elite and Lorcan's chapters. The scene ends when Lorcan says, "You will tell me what you know once you are better." And then Aelin thinks she supposed that to him. Sorrow and despair would be some sort of sickness. I was like, ugh, face-palming Lorcan. Because I was like, you're supposed to be her husband. You poking dinner plate hands brute.
You know what dinner plate hands does to me, Lorraine?
I know. That's why I put it in there.
Oh my God, that was the best thing you've ever said on this podcast. Okay, even funnier was the way this section of the chapter ended when all of the carnival people are so happy the ground is dry enough for tents, and it says, Aelin spied the one that had been raised for her and Lorcan and wished it would rain. But also, let me just say, not me. I'd be giddy as hell to share time with Lorcan. I'd be like, oh no, this is terrible. My husband.
So sad. So after this, we switch to Lorcan's POV, where we see that he spends a lot of mental energy thinking about his fake wife. In particular, I love that Lorcan, who is generally devoid of feelings himself, is growing some compassion for Aelin when he thinks he dealt with enough people to know Marianne wasn't wicked or conniving or wholly selfish. He wished she was because it'd make it easier, make his task much easier. I really do think as their relationship progresses, Aelin will continue to demonstrate to Lorcan what compassion is and convince him of Aelin's cause. Just like Fenris and Gabriel have had their eyes open to a different type of ruler, seeing how Aelin and Rowan operate together, I wonder if Aelin will sort of push Lorcan into rethinking what he is doing at some point. And that, of course, requires her to figure out what Lorcan is actually doing. But I have a good feeling that he's not going to abandon her in the end, and that Lorcan will help Aelin when it comes down to it. Maybe Aelin's loyalty to Aelin and hope for a better future will be the catalyst for all of that.
Ooh, so on the one hand, I'm like, yes, absolutely, because I really feel like Lorcan is going to develop all the feelings for Aelin, which will definitely change his perspective. But at the same time, he seems to have a particularly visceral hatred, or at least a very strong dislike for Aelin and Rowan. And so it's hard for me to imagine him changing his mind on that. I want to say yes, but I'm like, I don't know. So we'll see.
I'm just waiting to see because, like, obviously we heavily speculate that Maeve is valg. And if that turns out to be true and everybody finds out about that, then what is the cadre going to do? So that's something that's kind of been whirling in the back of my mind for now. So I guess we'll see. But
oh, I hadn't even thought about the implications of that. Ooh.
Because, like, if there's anything that's going to sway them, it's going to be that, if that turns out to be true. Because, like, who wants to serve a freaking valg?
Oh, yeah.
Anyways, so I got to be honest, I got super giddy when Lorcan realizes the caravan had constructed a tent for them once they get back to the campsite. He thinks their tent. And immediately I was like, God's above. The whole scene was just hilarious because once they go inside, it says, Lorcan just frowned a bit before ducking inside and remained ducking slightly because it's like still too small for them. But I did have a random question for you. Do you think the caravan, and more specifically Umbriel, I guess, were they all just being nice and letting Lorcan and Aelin have a night together? Or do you think it was actually like a little test for them?
You know, that's a good question. My first instinct was to say they're just assuming since they're married, they'd sleep together. But now that I think about it, there's a lot of descriptions of Umbriel being too observant and nosy. And so maybe she at least is trying to test them or suspects. I don't know. This was definitely the set of chapters where I was like, I don't trust Umbriel. I don't really know what she's going to do. I can't put my finger on it, but I just find her not trustworthy. I mean, old Money Eyes Molly, I'm sure would sell them out in a heartbeat for some money, you know? So like between her and Umbriel, maybe a little bit of a testy test.
Yeah, I was thinking it's kind of a test because Aelin immediately worries about someone walking in on them and seeing if they choose to sleep separate, right? Because like that would blow their cover basically. Though I did find it funny, Lorcan says, if someone walks into our tent without permission tonight, no one here will make the same mistake again. Because I was like, whoa, 0 to 100, like very quick. Slow down. Okay, Lorcan. Lorcan's cold black heart is definitely warming up to Aelin because he offers to get water for a bath and have her clothes washed. Good job, Lorcan. I did kind of eye roll, however, when he thought creature comforts to get her to trust him, be grateful to him, to want to help him, to ease that dangerous brittleness. Honestly, I kind of wanted to like smack him upside the head a little bit and be like, give her a hug, Lorcan. That's what she needs. But I do like for Lorcan being a fae with no feelings and all. I think it's good that he can sense Aelin is emotionally drained and is reaching her limit in this moment. So he's trying to help her in his own cold, calculated way. I also wanted to note that Aelin insists he wash too. And I was like, ooh, Scandi Aelin. But Lorcan thinks she'd likely beg to sleep in the wagon if he was naked in there. And that kind of stuck out to me because on a first read, okay, I thought he was insinuating that he has many scars or something, and that would be the thing that scares Aelin off. But for the record, follow-up thought immediately after that was maybe he was referring to his size, scaring Aelin off. But I don't know. What did you think?
I think that this made me laugh so hard. I had to go in the other room so I didn't wake up my husband. Okay, because
you have to wonder. You're like, what's going on? I don't know.
It's just so funny to me because between the two of us, I feel like I'm definitely the more Scandi one. So when I read this, I was like, what? So I took a much more scholarly approach to this part of the chapter. I took this as Lorcan perceiving that she was still very young and likely a virgin, and or he has correctly perceived that men have treated her poorly in the past. Of course, he doesn't know to what degree, but that would make her probably uncomfortable about being around a naked man, and so he was trying to be sensitive to that because you have to remember this world, in this world building, it seems like there's this sense of propriety, like women are really not to be unsupervised with men and things like that, and so it's likely that Aelin has never been around a man unsupervised and definitely not a naked man. But also to what you said, maybe Lorcan is I can't even say it.
Well endowed.
Well endowed. Hellas gifted him with much more than his power. You know what I'm saying?
That's funny. Oh my God.
Oh man,
Okay,
it's going to be a fun episode.
Right.
It's going to be fun.
It is. I was feeling pretty
spicy.
I don't know what I was feeling. Yeah, I was feeling like spicy, just excited in the set of chapters. So anyways.
Probably Mala's power coursing through your veins.
I burn with delight for these chapters. To continue, Lorcan concedes to Aelin's little power test and agrees to bathe as well. And when he returns from getting hot water, he proceeds to ask about her foot. And I was like, yay, Lorcan cares, Lorcan cares. I was giving him a hard, mischievous side eye when it said he was curious. He wanted to know how and when and why. Marian was beautiful. Surely marring her like that had been done with some ill intent, or to prevent something worse. Lorcan doesn't really seem to care much about anyone, so for him to be curious about Aelid's life definitely means she is growing on him. On the other hand, though, I did wonder if it could be that he is still just, assessing her threat level and trying to figure out if she does have some magic or power.
I gotta be honest, I think Aelin is just slowly working her way into Lorcan's heart, and he just doesn't even realize it yet.
Sweet little innocent Aelin, supposedly.
I was gonna say, big supposedly on that.
Aelin kicks her poor husband out of the tent while she bathes. No free shows for him today. And of course, it was very notable that Lorcan 100% knows Aelin removes something and hides it under her mattress before getting into the bath. I'm just waiting for Lorcan to figure out that she has a word key. It's really only a matter of time, and it seems like it's going to happen soon because Lorcan is not going to let that go. So I would like to say petition to change our nickname from Lorcan to Lovin' Lorcan, because I think he has love on his brain.
Oh my God, Lorraine, we're trying so hard to make it happen. We're trying so hard. He was nicer at one time and we're like, they're in love.
Yeah.
Petition granted. Okay,
yes.
Petition granted. I think at one point we also called him Lion Lorcan. So we had Lion Lorcan, Lorcan, Lovin' Lorcan. I guess they can all be true.
Currently Lovin' Lorcan.
I call him Daddy Lorcan.
Oh, okay. That's right, because you gave up Aelin for Lorcan instead. Boo.
No, that's not true.
You can't have them all.
You have Torian. That's fine. That's all you need. And you can have Rowan, too.
Fair enough. Okay.
I just have Chaol, Aelin, and Lorcan. And I'll decide between those three eventually.
Plus,
one of them will probably die in the series, so that will eliminate them from the running.
How dare you? Don't say that.
Well, no one has ever told me directly that people die, but given people's trauma responses to this series, I'm pretty sure people die.
We'll get there when we get there.
Yeah, I can't do that right now. I'm barely hanging on.
Yeah. While waiting for Aelin to finish her bath, he begins to wonder what would happen to Aelin after she meets with Aelin, and then thinks it wasn't his concern. He left his conscience on the cobblestones of the back streets of Dornell 5 centuries ago. Dare I say, it's coming back. This is then followed by his thought about Rowan and losing a damn fine commander to love, for Lorcan had known as he'd pinned Rowan into the grass outside Mistward, the prince thrashing and screaming for Aelin Galathinius, that everything was about to change. What a treat. Dorian could tell, Lorcan can tell, everyone can tell. Like, seriously, when are we finally going to get the reveal that Aelin and Rowan are mates? It better be soon, because I say this every single episode, but I'm like, I'm tired of waiting. Okay, just like tell us.
Oh, I know. At this point, pretty much every damn character in the book has confirmed it. Literally everyone is like, they could sense the mating bond between them and just assume that they've never told anybody. And I'm like, well, they haven't told us. So
again, I do also want to know more of Lorcan's backstory that's caused him to be so closed off. I don't think he's actually, thinking about loving Elide yet, but it's definitely interesting that he is curious about Elide and gets somewhat protective over her as well. I also found it notable that Lorcan thinks Aelin was a fool to barter away Athryl's ring for Rowan instead of asking Maeve for armies and an alliance against Morath. But we do know that Lorcan has Athryl's ring, and I wonder if maybe she will be able to use it still. And that is, of course, if Lorcan can be convinced to join Aelin's cause.
I picked up on this too because this seems to imply the ring is far more valuable than I originally thought it was. To our knowledge, it was made by Mala herself and grants the wearer immunity to the valg. And while that is definitely something that's extremely valuable, it doesn't seem like it would be valuable enough to Maeve that Aelin could have bartered for all of those things that Lorcan thinks about. So that makes me highly, highly suspicious that the ring is actually a lot more important and powerful than we have been led to believe. And so I'm definitely going to be back on ring alert because that really made my ears perk up. I'm like, Aelin could have got all of that for the ring? I'm like, okay.
Post-bath, Lorcan also goes so far as to wash Elide's clothes and bring back dinner. Excellent husband work. And it seems his kindness has paid off because Elide finally reveals the truth about Vermin Vernon and his plans to breed Elide with the valg. You love to see a shadow daddy get to work, and Lorcan is no exception. I loved that immediately his magic surges out, and then he asks, would you like me to kill him for you? And I was like, ooh, that's scary, but also swoon,
Oh my God. What is it about fantasy books that makes me abandon all of my morality and values? Because when I read this, I was like, get me a bucket of ice water, because why was that quite possibly the hottest thing you could have said? But it worked for me. I was like, yes.
I also feel like Lorcan truly respects Elide for her strength and her cleverness because he thinks, and for a moment, he could see the woman she'd become. Someone who, regardless of where she'd been born, any queen would prize at her side. Last but not least, she reveals the explosion at Morath was not an accident. Though I admire Elide for refusing to reveal who actually caused it because she didn't want to risk the lives of the people who saved her. Elide is just the epitome of loyalty, and her character has really grown on me as we've progressed in the series so far. Next, I also noted when Elide clarifies that Ilkin were not bred in the catacombs. Instead, she says they came from the mountains around Morath through far darker methods. That is definitely very alarming. And I really do wonder if Erawan is just straight up crafting things using the wyrdkey, I guess. Or I also wondered if he's summoning creatures through portals, kind of like what Cain did with the Ritterak.
I also wondered if perhaps Elide was wrong about this, because remember, it's described that they had given birth once and they were getting ready to give birth again. I mean, we don't know anything about what was created. We don't know about the life cycle or the growth rate or anything. So it's possible. You also have to take into consideration that Elide only saw into the room with the yellow legs once, and it was very briefly. And then any other time she was in the dungeon, she was completely locked up. So I'm actually not totally confident that Elide is right about this. I think to her knowledge, she thinks she is, but I am not so sure.
This immediately also causes Lorcan to worry about Wenlin's future when he thinks, how long would it be before these beasts were howling around Doranel, before it was his own continent under siege? Lorcan is also worried about Maeve and thinks there is no way she'd ally with such evil. But, of course, now that we highly suspect Maeve is valg, I think this could be another potential cause for a rift between Lorcan and his loyalty to Maeve later on. We still don't know what Maeve plans to do in terms of involvement with Erawan, but should she do nothing or anything even remotely like siding with Erawan, I think that would really tip Lorcan over the edge and propel a shift away from her. her, as it would with probably the rest of the cadre. To close out the chapter, Lorcan finally asks about her ankle and says, "Your foot has been ruined for years, though. He locked you in the dungeon that long." Aelin slips up to clarify that she'd only been in the dungeons for a week, but she'd had the ankle chains long before that. And this infuriates Lorcan to know that she'd been enslaved by Vernon. I love his anger on behalf of Aelin. I am 100% on board with Lorcan avenging Aelin by killing Vernon. Stamp of approval for murder. In this case, I am rife with honorable bloodlust.
When you say honorable bloodlust, it sounds really good. So yeah, we'll go with that. And I like that.
Exactly. The final line of this chapter really hit hard too, when Aelin says, "When you kill my uncle, ask him yourself." And I was like, ooh, I love a stone cold Aelin.
Never underestimate Aelin. That's what I'm learning
true.
very quickly.
All right, so that ends chapter 30. Moving on to chapter 31.
Aelin thinks about how the plan she and Rowan crafted to test Rolfe's magic map had actually worked. It had proven two things. One, Rolfe's map did in fact work. And two, that the pirate lord was indeed living in terror of the valg returning to this harbor. I took notice of this because it is definitely foreshadowing for what Aelin does later, calling the valg to the harbor and then leveraging her help to basically force Rolfe into allying with her because she knew that Rolfe is scared shitless of the valg.
Honestly, that was unhinged. And we'll get there when we get there because that was way overboard. I also took notice of when right after this, Aelin wonders what his map had shown him of the wyrdkey, if it revealed the difference between it and the wordstone rings his men had been enslaved with. I guess I would assume the wyrdkey and the wordstone ring would give off the same energy, but then again, Aelin doesn't seem to experience the same pounding headache that she felt when she was in the clock tower back in Crown of Midnight. In that case, the wordstone really affected her, and so that makes me wonder if there actually is a difference in the energy signature, so I don't know.
Aelin and Rowan break into Gavriel and Fenris's room, and I thought it was funny when Fenris said, "You could have used the door." And Aelin responded, "Why bother when a dramatic entrance is so much more fun?" And this immediately reminded me of that quote from Calm we like to repeat so often.
Yep.
Dramatic entrances were practically her art form.
I just find it hilarious that Fenris matches Aelin's energy because they just have a very similar sense of humor.
Yes, their particular flavor of sarcasm is almost identical. You almost feel like they're like brother and sister, you know? Fenris makes a pointed comment about Aelin's mortal lifespan and then asks if she's due to settle soon. This is the first time this concept has been introduced, so here is what we learn about what it means to, quote-unquote, settle. It is a transition pure-blooded fae and some demi-fae go through once their bodies lock into immortal youth. It's a rough process, and their bodies and their magic can need months to adjust to the freezing and reordering of their aging process. During the process, the fae have no control over their power, and some even lose it entirely. For demi-fae specifically, it might cause them to be longer lived, or they can actually be gifted true immortality, like Lorcan, for example. Because of their heritage, both Edian and Aelin will possibly go through this process and may be gifted or lose their gifts. This information definitely raised many alarm bells for me because it seems like both Edian and Aelin will have no control on if or when this happens. It also means that Aelin could permanently lose her magic, which would be devastating for a variety of reasons. However, on the other hand, it does mean both she and Edian could be given the gift of true immortality, which would make me extremely happy because then they can all be together forever, unless Erawan kills them. I don't know, I got a lot of conflicting feelings about this, but all that is to say, this concept is important. It will come up again. We are being given this information for a specific purpose, and I know we've talked a lot about Aelin's mortality and is she immortal or not, and what does that mean for Rowan and everything, and so this will come up again, for sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. Boo to Erawan killing them. I don't want that
I know.
to happen, first and
I just
foremost.
had to say it. I'm sorry.
No, I know.
I'm really sorry.
It's like,
Okay.
it's that thing in the back of your mind where you're like, could happen. Or she gets like sacrificed by the gods. That's like kind of my thought. But anyways, this immediately made me think of another SJM series that talks about a process that people in the world can go through to become immortal. But aside from that, yeah, I am definitely going to be cautiously optimistic for now. Not only am I concerned Aelin could lose her magic, I am concerned that the settling will occur at a really terrible time. We believe Aelin's power will likely need to be used to put the wyrdkeys back in the wyrdgate, or maybe even use other magical objects like the lock. And so if she all of a sudden undergoes the settling process, she may not be able to accomplish those things. Plus, if her magic is in some uncontrolled state, I definitely feel like that would make her susceptible to being overtaken by the gods, Maeve, or even Erawan. I also wonder if the settling process will become another test of some sort for Aelin, perhaps by the gods or something, where as she undergoes it and enters whatever magical settling state she is then forced to decide as she undergoes it whether to become immortal but lose her power or keep her power and remain mortal. You know what I mean? Like they're going to be like, you can't have both. You got to choose one or the other, you know? So I don't know.
Well, yeah, you pick being immortal with Rowan. I mean, duh. Who cares about power? Rowan's got enough power for the both of them.
True. Yeah.
I hate that. Why would you say that? Don't take that back.
I'm sorry.
Okay. It's okay. You're just doing the word for the podcast. I appreciate it. The conversation then shifts again to Maeve and how exactly her blood oaths work because Aelin has noticed that her commands to Rowan seem different. She says, with Rowan, every order I give him, even casual ones, are his to decide to do with. Only when I actively pull on the bonds can I get him to ... And even then, it's more of a suggestion.
This whole conversation about the rules and style of rulership a blood oath has, depending on the intentions of the person who set it up, is really fascinating to me. It really speaks to the difference between Aelin and Maeve as rulers. Aelin has never wanted to force anyone to serve her unwillingly and has established her court to be one of loyalty, respect, and honor, while Maeve, on the other hand, is a valg. I'm just kidding. But her intention was to force people to bend to her will and obey her at all costs.
I was ready just to accept that.
Yeah, I know.
I was just like, yes, she is, obviously.
I'm not kidding, but I'm kidding for now until it's confirmed.
Yeah.
Most concerning about Maeve's blood oath setup is that because hers was created with obedience in mind, it makes it so that anyone with a blood oath to her cannot break it on their own. Fenris says if we did so, the magic that binds us to her would kill us all in the process. We've had discussions about whether Maeve dying would release some of their blood oaths to her, and this kind of makes me wonder if that's not the case. Although I don't see why a blood oath matters if the person who created it is dead. So maybe that is still an option unless Maeve makes specific arrangements for them, like she connects some kind of ongoing thing to it even after her death.
Yeah, this is a really big question mark for me in terms of world building and how blood oath magic works. My very strong suspicion is that it has purposely not been revealed because breaking the blood oath to Maeve is going to become a plot point, and this conversation is really just foreshadowing and build up for that.
But we also see that Aelin's main concern is whether Maeve would have any way of claiming ownership over Aedion thanks to Gavriel. And this was briefly brought up in Queen of Shadows when Aelin and Rowan revealed to Aedion Gavriel is his father. And I'll admit that this still really confuses me because I just wonder how can a blood oath extend to someone you haven't specifically exchanged blood with? If that's true, then I feel like that's really messed up, magically speaking, to be able to create a blood oath with someone indirectly. You know what I mean?
I gotta be honest, I don't really understand this concern. It seems pretty clear to me that all of the cadre swore the blood oath by choice. Sure, Maeve definitely manipulated them into it, like with Fenris and Connell, but Fenris ultimately still agreed to it. So I just don't see why this is even a valid concern. It doesn't make any sense to me. Aedion would have to agree to it, which he would never do. I don't know. I don't understand this weird fear that if Maeve finds out that Aedion is Gavriel's son, then she'll have some claim over him. I don't see it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would need more information about that to understand the implications of why this is a concern. So anyways, Aelin shifts the conversation to a discussion of Maeve's plans to head to Eelway and their likely crossing of paths. But Fenris points out the bigger concern is if she plans to ally with Erawan since his forces are also in the area, specifically the Gulf of Oro. I found it notable that Gavriel muses perhaps Maeve would kill off Morath's forces in the area to signal she was willing to help Aelin, and while Aelin doesn't believe Maeve would take that sort of risk and loss to her own forces, she thinks no matter what Aelin knew, she'd accept any offer of aid from Maeve, risk or no. And I was like, absolutely not, Aelin. Do not make any kind of bargain or get help from Maeve, because I just have a really bad feeling about doing that. Honestly, I don't even think Aelin would have to agree. I feel like Maeve already has some sort of alternative plan or trap set up that is yet to be revealed to us. I don't think that Maeve wants to ally with Erawan because, again, why wait until now if she really wanted to do that? But I could totally see her swindling Aelin with a promise to help or capitalizing on Aelin's desperation to save the continent and then pulling the rug out, you know?
Same. When I read that, I was like, no, Aelin, don't do it. This just has trap written all over it. There's no way that Aelin's going to come out of that unscathed. I mean, it's freaking Maeve. It's freaking Maeve. But I do think it does show how truly desperate her situation really is. She must really feel she's outmatched right now to be willing to even consider blindly accepting aid from Maeve like that. And so that did not fill me with goodness and light in any regard.
Speaking of swindling plans, Aelin asked whether Maeve gave them an order to also take the keys and Athel's ring in addition to killing Lorcan, to which Fenris responds, if we say she gave us the order to take everything, will you kill us, Aerofire? So that to me confirms Maeve does want control of all magical items. I don't think that she cares about Lorcan at all. Other than that, she wants to, get revenge for his disobedience. But she for sure wants the wyrdkeys, the ring, and probably the lock as well for her own purposes. Though whether she knows about the lock is unconfirmed at this time.
This honestly did not come as a surprise to me at all, so I wasn't really concerned by it. Literally all the players in the unfinished game want the control of the wyrdkeys, so that didn't alarm me.
So Aelin responds to Fenris that their lives depend on how useful you prove to be as an ally, and it turns out that they're pretty useful. Gabriel reveals Rolfe has already procured a shipment of weapons called fire lances from the southern continent. While Aelin ends the meeting with Fenris and Gabriel without divulging what she plans to do with this information, it's clear Aelin's plan is to make sure she can get Rolfe's alliance and control of his armada, thereby also getting the fire lances as weapons as well, through some sort of scheme that will be revealed shortly. Also, as a side note, the way I'm envisioning them is as like little flamethrowers. However, if it's not magical fire that they produce, is that really gonna do anything against the valg creatures or valg-infected soldiers? I guess if she wants the weapons, then I'm inclined to kind of be like, sure. I don't know. I have questions about them.
I hadn't really thought about it, so I'm glad that you brought it up. All of these are really good questions. We really just need more info because to me, if it's just normal fire, as you pointed out, how are they any different than shooting a flaming arrow? Right? Like if you just need some regular old fire, there's got to be better ways, like flaming whatever in a catapult. I don't know.
True.
So yeah. I'm sure we'll find out more in the near-ish future, but I would assume if they're of high value, they have to be something more than just regular old fire.
Aelin and Rowan take to the rooftops of Skulls Bay, where Aelin worries about their chances against Maeve and Erawan when she thinks we're playing a game against two monarchs who have ruled and schemed longer than most kingdoms have existed. Seeing the cadre, how Maeve contains them, she came so close to separating us this spring. So close. And I was like, retweet. But this really worries me that Maeve is going to do something to Aelin or Rowan to get leverage against them, knowing how deep their bond runs. Erawan, too, of course. We have yet to see the full extent of his armies, and we also still don't know what the situation between Maeve and Erawan is. And so there's just many things to be worried about.
Many, many things. This kind of talk always takes me back to what Rowan said in chapter 21 of Aerofire. The people you love are just weapons that will be used against you. And I am sick. I am sick because I feel like this is exactly what Maeve and Erawan will do. And I feel like that line was foreshadowing for a lot of bad things that are going to happen.
Yeah. On a nice note, I did love that Rowan says, I would have fought for the rest of my life to find a way to return to you again. I knew it the moment you emerged from the valg's darkness and smiled at me through your flames. Not to keep harping on this, but they're freaking mates, okay? They just So next, Rowan and Aelin proceed to make out hot, and then Aelin thinks they could burn the entire world to ashes with it. He was hers and she was his, and they had found each other across centuries of bloodshed and loss, across oceans and kingdoms and war.
Aww, I do like that, but Lorraine, you literally skipped the best part.
What?
Rowan then tells Aelin, even when you're in another kingdom, Aelin, your fire is still in my blood, my mouth. And I don't know what that means, but it's provocative, and I liked it.
Oh, I feel like that sounds kind of weird. I didn't like that part as much.
How dare you? How dare you?
You're weird for liking that.
Okay, whatever. Cough, cough, sighs.
Okay, anyways, I do still worry that Aelin and Rowan's love for each other will be exploited by someone somehow. Not just Maeve and Erawan, but also the gods, especially considering what happens later. That line gets a little too literal, and so perhaps it's also meant to be a warning of what could happen if their power is misused or manipulated.
Wow, thanks for that. You really dumped a verbal bucket of ice water on me. So
You're welcome.
You really took the fire out of my blood.
So that ends chapter 31. Moving on to chapter 32. We switch to Aedian's POV, who anxiously thinks about the first meeting he was soon to have with his father. I thought it was so touching that Aedian also thinks about Lysandra, who was sleeping like the dead, deep in a recovery sleep. And he thinks, and not normal sleep, but the sleep that Aelin and Rowan sometimes went into in order to let their magic recover. And she really needs that sleep, because Lysandra is the real hero of this set of chapters. I'm honestly surprised that she's still functioning, because she's been using her magic constantly over the past few weeks, and I can only imagine how tired she must be.
I also feel like this description of her exhaustion is some light foreshadowing what's about to go down at the end in chapter 37, where she's exhausted, she can't transform. Also, as we're discussing it, Rowan thinks about how he forgets that Aelin's still very young and her magic and power is still growing. And I wonder if the same is true for Lysandra. Lysandra and Aelin are basically the same age. And so I wonder if her well of power will continue to grow, and so she'll be able to sustain bigger transitions for longer periods of time.
I would imagine that's probably the case for anyone who has magic, right? They all,
I would think so,
go through a maturing process and get stronger as they go. So yeah, I just love that Aedian cares for her by tucking her into bed, and just, he was so cute as petition to reinstate as your book boyfriend. Or better yet, if you don't want him, dibs.
Wow. Okay, those are fighting words. Let me take off my earrings. Okay. But I totally agree. I love that Aedian really looks out for Lysandra's well-being. We'll talk about it more in chapters 37, but in a way, Aelin is not looking out for what's best for Lysandra, which, to be fair, is Aelin's character's burden. She can't fight this entire war alone, so she's going to have to let others risk themselves for her. But I'm very appreciative that Aedian seems to put Lysandra's well-being above the war, and it seems like he will continue to do so. It's so hard for all of them because they understand that they all have to make sacrifices and everything, but I feel like there has to be a balance to that, right? They can't all basically be suicidal for the sake of the mission. And so I like that Aedian will help balance that by putting Lysandra's needs above Aelin's needs, or, things like that.
Right. I also thought it was so sweet when it said, so Aedian bathed and dressed, debating if it made him a fool to brush his hair for his father. I know that the meeting doesn't indicate Aedian wants Gavriel in his life at this time, but I think the fact that he tries to make himself presentable does show he wants to make a good impression. I think there's a deeper part of Aedian that perhaps doesn't believe he is worthy because Gavriel is this legendary warrior. So he's angry and he resents what Gavriel did to his mother and everything, but simultaneously, he worries about his reputation in comparison too, I think. So there's a lot of things going on there. We next change to Lysandra's perspective, who, after telling Aedian to change, gets herself dressed with borrowed clothes from Aelin. And I got very excited when it said Aelin's barked "get out" was likely heard from across the bay, and Lysandra was smirking with feline wickedness as she returned. Because I was like, did Aelin and Rowan finally make it happen? But it wasn't the case, so premature excitement on that one. They head to the dining room to eat before going to Rolfe's Tavern, and I also thought it was hilarious that Aedian thinks gods, the females in his court, ate more than he did. Because same. I love a good sweet treat and snacks to go with any meal.
Can you imagine how fun girl dinner would be with Aelin and Lysandra?
Yes.
It would be the best.
So fun. Yes, I love that. Upon the meeting, the lion incarnate for the first time, Aedian immediately notices the similarities and where some of its features came from. This meeting is unsurprisingly tense and honestly pretty sad. Aedian is unexpectedly overcome with a desire to make Gavriel feel his pain rather than get to know him. One of my questions right now is, what is Gavriel's backstory with Maeve? Because it's clear Aedian resents him for working for her and blames him for his mother's death and that she died keeping this secret so Maeve wouldn't get her claws on him. So like everyone who enters into Maeve's circle, how did that come to be? Why did they do it? Etc. We also get some more context about Aelин's mother, who was apparently sick with something that was curable had she gone to the Fae compounds. It was particularly heartbreaking to learn, quote, she was 23 years old, she never married, and her family shunned her. She refused to tell anyone who'd sired me and took their disdain, their humiliation without an ounce of self-pity. She did it because she loved me, not you. And I felt so bad for his mother, who was shunned from her family for having a son out of wedlock, or at least that is what I'm assuming, is the reason for why her family shunned her. But as a reminder, her fear of Maeve was the reason that she told Evelyn about Aelin, and I'm assuming sent him to be raised in Terrorson.
Man, this set of chapters is really an emotional beating. The first time I read this chapter, I was a little taken back by how angry Aelin is. I definitely did not expect it to be all sunshine and rainbows, but after rereading it and thinking about it, I think this reaction makes a lot of sense. As you guys know, Lauren and I both watch White Lotus, and in season 3, there is a character who sees a stress management and wellness teacher, and she says, underneath anger, there's always a sadness. And that really stuck with me. Oftentimes when I feel angry, I try to ask myself, what is beneath the anger? And usually it's almost always stems from something deeper. Anger is a safe mask we wear to mask the vulnerability of pain, and Aelin is no exception to this. We've discussed this a few times, but I think we have barely scratched the surface on Aelin's trauma. It's been alluded to multiple times that he has experienced something that he hasn't even told Aelin about. And on top of that, the fall of Terrorson, his mother dying at a young age, what family he did have being killed during Adolin's invasion, and then, of course, the decade he spent serving the literal monster who destroyed everything he loved. Aelin has experienced so much pain and suffering that it just makes sense that in this moment would mask itself as anger. And I think what Aelin's not saying is that he's angry at his father for not coming to help, for not knowing what he was going through and not being there for any point. And so I think Aelin's going to have to do a lot of work to work through this. And I don't know, the whole thing just makes me sad.
Gavriel pleads with Aelin, stating he wants nothing from him and that he was sorry, which was also sad because you can really tell in this conversation that Gavriel just wants to know Aelin. Do you have a question to pose? Do you think Gavriel and Aelin's mother were in a full-on relationship, or do you think it was a one-off thing?
I definitely do not feel like it was a one-off thing. Gavriel does not seem like that type, and when Aelin mentions his mother, it's described that grief flashes in Gavriel's eyes. And so I'm not going to say that Gavriel loved Aelin's mother because we don't know the timeline and we just don't have enough details, but I definitely feel like he cared for her.
Yeah, that's the sense that I get as well. But in either case, I would assume Gavriel being bloodsworn to Maeve would significantly change the nature of whatever it was between them. I'd like to think that Gavriel and Aelin's mom did love each other, and that is also why Gavriel is so overcome with the grief and reflects on how much Aelin looks like her and all that stuff. So just waiting to get some more context and background info on all that. Aelin and Lysandra leave, where they then have a private conversation outside where it's clear Aelin did not expect to see what he did, but despite that, still worries what Gavriel will think of him. He thinks he'll realize soon enough who exactly I am and perhaps not be so desperate.
I feel like this quote points to exactly what we discussed earlier. Part of Aelin's pain is how he feels about himself. Very frequently, it's described he doesn't feel worthy. His self-worth is very low. And that is also just really sad.
Yeah. I love that Lysandra once again senses that Aelin is projecting, I think, what he feels about himself onto Gavriel and offers support to say, who exactly do you think you are? Adolin's whore? Is that what you still think of yourself? The general who held his kingdom together, who saved his people when they were forgotten even by their own queen. That's the man I know. And at the core of it all, to accept being loved and valued by others, I think Aelin first has to find confidence within himself. I know that's cliche, but truly, he doesn't think Gavriel would respect him because of Gavriel's reputation, when in reality, that's so far from the truth. I once again also love that Lysandra challenges Aelin's thoughts while also still supporting him. And their whole dynamic is so great to see, and I can't wait to see it develop in the future.
I really feel like SJM is doing a really good job of laying the emotional framework for Lysandra and Aelin's potential romantic relationship. And I really like and appreciate that. I feel like if/when, I'm just making an assumption that they will, since Aelin literally promises he'll marry Lysandra, but whatever, you get my point.
Yeah.
I really do feel like when they get together, it'll be really gratifying because their relationship has really developed in all of the stages. I don't know, I'm really enjoying the progression of that.
I also love the foreshadowing we get about Lysandra being in on Aelin's plans when they joke about turning into Gabriel's nightmare for him. And when Aedian asks what creature, she says, something I've been working on. And I was like, sea dragon. 2 hours later, we switch to Aelin's POV as she strides into the tavern bearing both Goldrin and Damaris. While longing for a time when she had nothing urgently weighing on her, she confirms for us, dear readers, that she and Rowan did not do the deed. Boo. Rowan had simply been too tired. And all I can say is they better get their time at some point because they deserve it, and I'm tired of waiting.
Retweet. But also, I like that SJM incorporated some realism into this book because let me just say, sometimes, you're just too tired. You just ain't gonna happen. You're like, let's sleep,
Yeah. So she and Rowan stride to the table where Rolfe is less than happy to see her because she had not, in fact, left yet, as he'd demanded of them earlier. Aelin immediately takes note of the map on the table, which turns out to display the locations of Morath's army, which were currently positioned in a line from the Ferrian Gap to the mouth of the Avery River, as well as in the Gulf of Oro, Melisande, Fenharrow, and near Eoway's border. So Erawan is everywhere. Rolfe confirms that aid to the north was now impossible, and Erawan stood poised to strike. Obviously, the message is Eoway is fucked. And that ends chapter 32.
Excellent transition, Lorraine.
Moving on to chapter 33. So everyone quickly realizes that without a standing army, Eoway stood no chance, and that this was likely an extermination event planned by Erawan to retaliate against Aelin for her shenanigans in Ilium. No regrets. I don't know if anyone knows what that is from, but that's a joke. But this is likely
I'm laughing, but I don't know what
bad.
that means.
It's from what is that movie called again? I can't think of the movie right now, but
doesn't someone get a tattoo and it's spelled wrong?
It's the
what is that from?
I can't remember the movie's name right now, but it's really funny. It's a family that takes that camping trip and it has like Jennifer Aniston.
God, yeah, now it's gonna bug me.
Anyways, # no regrets, right? Actually, lots of regrets. This is really bad for Eoway. It would basically ensure Aelin could never fulfill her oath to Nehemia, which is absolutely tragic. Aelin thinks she brought this upon Eoway by mocking Erawan because he knew who Slaenus Sardothian had cared for, and he wanted to break her spirit, her heart, by showing her what his armies could do, what they would do whenever he now felt like it. Not to Terrasen, but to the kingdom of the friend she'd loved so dearly, the kingdom she had sworn to protect, to save. Aelin considers the map spread before them, spotting a small name along the western coast of the Wastes, which said Briarcliff. And I was like, yep, we're going to get Ansel of Briarcliff and the Silent Assassins soon. But specifically, it says her gaze dragged down south to the Red Desert, where another life debt, many life debts, waited for her to claim them.
Oh, I know. The way I started cheering when I read this, we knew they were going to come back to this story. We just freaking knew it. I know I'm acting like they already have, but come on. This is pretty heavy-handed foreshadowing. Oh, man. I especially cannot wait to see Aelin and Ansel meet again. Because, they're not going to, run into each other's arms and embrace, right?
Right.
There's still some bad blood there and unresolved issues. And I literally can't wait. I'm so excited.
So done bargaining with Rolfe, Aelin demands he hand over his armada, arm them with fire lances, and ship any extra to the Mycenaeans, but Rolfe once again refuses and still denies the existence of any association with the Mycenaeans. I was very excited, though, when Aelin confronts him with the truth about his heritage, because that's right, Rolfe is heir of the Mycenaean people. Wow.
Let me just say, damn, it feels good to get that confirmed because we totally called that. Okay, we called that early. I think you started it, and I was like, okay, yeah, I'm on board. So we get things right sometimes, guys.
So Aelin also speculates the Mycenaeans have been hiding in the Dead Islands for a long time, and then offers, I took back the city, your ancient home, for you, for the Mycenaean. It is yours if you dare to claim your people's inheritance. Very exciting to get that confirmation. And now I am pumped to see if the hiding Mycenaeans do in fact return. But this was also interesting because it shows taking back Ilium had yet another hidden reason, and that was to offer it as a bargaining chip with Rolfe. Every time I think I know what Aelin's doing, I very quickly realize I have no idea what Aelin is actually doing because she's very crafty and she has a plan within a plan within a plan. It's crazy.
Yes, I feel like specifically with the temple and Ilium, you're like, okay, she did it for this reason. And then another reason's revealed. And you're like, okay, for these 2 things. And it's like 5 different reasons. And you're like,
Right.
okay. So getting her plan within a plan scheme confirmed has really made me go on high alert when Aelin does literally anything. So now I'm going to really focus on those so that I can try to predict the plans that are layered within, because I don't like getting got. I was not prepared for any of this, and I don't like that.
So at this point, Aelin initiates the first step of her plan, which is absolutely crazy, by the way, like literally psychotic. And it says, she allowed a flicker of her magic to rise to the surface, allowed the gold in her eyes to glow like bright flame. The word key between her breasts began thrumming, whispering. The tendril of power she gathered rippled away in an invisible line. The world shuddered in its wake. Ominous? As a side note, before we see that this was a signal to a valg, do you want to know what I thought she was actually doing?
Since it's in invisible ink, yes, I absolutely do.
It's not any kind of crazy theory. I just thought it was funny. I thought she was signaling to the Mycenians. They were going to show up to prove he needed to ally with her and have this super symbolic moment right then and there. And obviously that was wrong. But that's where my brain went first, because they're talking about the Mycenian. And so that was my very first instinctual thought. She's going to call to them and they're going to come back. You know what I mean?
Lorraine, you sweet summer child. What a nice thought. What a lovely thing for you to think in this moment.
Yeah, it was not correct. And what she actually did was way worse than that. So one of the questions that we're going to be posing and talking about is whether or not Aelin actually intentionally used the word key. In this specific instance of it, I kind of felt like she was intentionally calling upon both her power and the word key to signal Erawan and the valg. And I say that because I am kind of unsure as to whether Aelin intentionally used it later in chapter 35 with the whole Deanna situation. But all in all, I'm still kind of confused. As we go, you'll see me kind of come to my full conclusion later. But the even bigger problem about this is that Erawan, I think, will now know for sure that she has a word key, because I don't think he knew prior to this, right? And so now that she's used it, regardless if it was intentional or unintentional, it seems pretty clear he's going to recognize its power. And that is very scary to me.
So I'm actually going to disagree. I do not think that she used the word key at this particular moment. After I read your notes, I went back and reread that part a dozen times. It does say the word key between her breasts began thrumming, whispering, but there are very frequent descriptions of the word key reacting like that, both Elid's word key and Aelin's. So that to me did not necessarily indicate that it was in use. I also... maybe I answer that question later. I think
we
I
come
answered your
back to
question
it multiple times.
We do, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm I think I answer your question about Erawan knowing about it, because I actually don't think it necessarily is guaranteed that Erawan will realize she has a word key, but we'll talk about it more.
Oh, interesting. Anyways, I do get why she did it. She needed to prove a point, but this whole thing was insane once we see how many bows and soldiers Erawan sends over. To say it was a miracle everything worked out is quite literally the understatement of a lifetime. It was pure dumb luck that she didn't get everyone killed with this plan.
I have many, many, many thoughts about this, which we will talk about once we actually get to the plan reveal. But as I mentioned during the overarching thoughts, I have some thoughts that are likely unpopular opinions about this, because I think this whole thing is bananas, and not in a fun way, in a bad way.
Rolfe immediately demands to know what she'd done, and Rowan covers with a smooth lie to say Milady has to release bits of her power daily or it can consume her. And I did laugh at that because it said despite herself, despite what she'd done, she decided she wanted Rowan to call her Milady at least once every day. And I don't know why that's so funny to me, but something about calling Aelin Milady is hilarious because she's literally the opposite of a proper lady in many cases,
Retweet. I thought the exact same thing. I don't know why. It was just a cute little flirtatious thing. I liked it.
Yeah. Aelin and her court wait for the signal to play out its desired effect, just as Dorian strolls in shortly after, having felt the magic as well. When the clock strikes 11 a.m., Aelin tells Rolfe, "Thank you for your hospitality," knowing it was time, but Rolfe demands to know if that was it. Aelin feigns no longer needing Rolfe if he wasn't going to help, and that she'd find someone else with an armada. Rolfe takes the opportunity to not be careful with his words and makes an awful comment to say, "Did Sam die still pining after you, or did you finally stop treating him like Phil?" And I get Rolfe is angry, but I was like, Rolfe, leave Sam out of this, okay?
I agree. He crossed a line. I like Rolfe, but that was too far.
Rowan, of course, was not going to let that go unchecked and chokes Rolfe out over it, which was pretty intense. But there's no time to worry about that because shit gets real. Rolfe immediately feels a presence and looks to his hands in horror, where black, darker than the ink that had been etched there, spread across his fingers to his palms. Black such as only the valg could bring. And on a first read, I was like, oh my God, no.
Like, seriously, freaking out. Because in the moment, you don't even think that's going to happen. So you're like, whoa, wait, what? And then when you realize Aelin called them purposely, you're like, what is wrong with you? Why? It just all happened so fast. And so,
Right.
I don't know. I'm still unwell. I thought I would feel
Same.
better after writing notes and stuff, but I still don't feel better.
The true shenanigan immediately becomes clear to Rolfe, who pieces together that she'd summoned the valg, but Aelin continues with her ploy by declaring she and her court, as well as their new Fae allies, would not be sticking around to help Rolfe. So I'll admit, in the last set of chapters and everything, I wasn't necessarily bothered by Aelin's Selena Sardothian swagger and arrogance and all of that. But in this case, I definitely was, because honestly, it's just like really cruel and messed up for her to summon the valg on Rolfe and then be like, I'll offer a prayer to Mala for you. Girl, what? All just to prove that he needed her help to stay alive. It's crazy.
Hold this thought and prepare for my TED Talk when we switch to Dorian's POV about this whole mess, because I prepared a TED Talk for you all because I'm not happy.
So one of Rolfe's men rush in to relay that there were 8 warships with at least 100 soldiers on each of them. And they're also, of course, flanked by sea wyverns, all moving so fast that it's like the storm winds carry them. Realizing he was fucked, Rolfe finally gives in to allying with her, but adds, I want to be an admiral. I want this entire archipelago. I want Ilium, and when this war is over, I want Lord in front of my name, as it was before my ancestors' names long ago. So I did find that kind of interesting, though, because I feel like this kind of clarifies that Rolfe still understands he needs a formal title after all to truly have power and recognition. He really wants to be officially recognized as a lord so that all across the kingdom, everybody respects his power, I guess. Realistically, Aelin needs to give him a heck of a lot more. But in terms of payment, Aelin tells him he can keep whatever gold and treasure he can find on every Morath ship he sacks. She also agrees to the land and that he can carry the title Lord of Ilium and King of the Archipelago, and that any of his offspring would be recognized as heirs. And then Dorian also, of course, affirms that Otterlin would recognize this agreement as well. This is completely random, and I don't even know why I thought of it in this moment, but I have an off-the-wall ship to say. How do we feel about Rolfe and Ansel?
You weren't kidding. That really is off the wall. I think Ansel would eat Rolfe alive. I don't think Rolfe can handle Ansel. But what about Rolfe and Nesrin?
Nesrin's with Kale. What are you talking about?
Yeah, well, but they haven't sealed the deal.
What are you trying to say? Do you know something? What are you getting at?
No. Well, we're just making up random ships, okay? And until they're married, they're on the market, okay?
Oh my gosh. No, just with Kale right now. We're not going to have time for that to happen.
Well,
anyways.
When are Ansel and Rolfe going to be together? I thought we were just making crazy shit up.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, you're right. I think I like Rolfe and Ansel better.
Listen, last week I was shipping Dorian and Lorcan, so...
Fair enough, true. Lorien. Yeah, you're right.
Lorien. That was a little oopsie, but I still like Aelin and Dorian together. I know that's not going to happen. That's not what I want. But, if we're going to go off the wall ships, that's mine.
In a different universe. Yeah, maybe.
In a different life. That's right. I still like Dorian and Aelin together. Damn.
Oh, early TOG. Yeah, very nostalgic.
Actually, they were originally supposed to end up together at the conception of the series when it was still Queen of Glass. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh.
Yeah. I recently learned that little tidbit about the series, and I was like, it kind of makes sense, right? Their characters mirror each other a lot. But, obviously, I like Rowan and everything, so I'm not sad about it. But, yeah.
Oh, Dorian. Yeah. To end the conversation, Rolfe agrees to the terms as long as Aelin kills off the valg, though he adds, I cannot guarantee the Mycenians will rise. We've been scattered too far and too long. Only a small number live here, and they will not stir without proper motivation. And then he glances to the bar, as if he'd expected to see someone behind it. First, I was like, ooh, yes, I think the Mycenians will show themselves after the events that take place. And second, I believe this is confirmation that the barmaid is also Mycenian.
That's exactly what I thought too, especially because when we first meet the barmaid, it's described that she has sea dragon tattoos going up her forearms. And so that to me pretty much confirms definitely yes.
Rolfe and Aelin shake hands to seal the deal, and then we switch to Dorian's perspective. I thought it was funny that Dorian's first thought is, yeah, she's crazy. And he thinks brilliant and wicked, but insane. And I was like, yeah, retweet Dorian. Hard retweet on that.
I feel that in my bones, okay? And then he says, and perhaps the greatest, most unremorseful liar he'd ever encountered. And that is also so true. All of those things.
I find it interesting that Dorian thinks perhaps he could do with a bit more wickedness and insanity too. This war would not be won on smiles and manners. So previously, just like Rowan's thought when he thinks this was war though, and he had no intention of losing it when he leveraged Aelin to get Fenris and Gabriel to ally with them, I think Dorian is also realizing there are going to be many tough and sometimes cruel decisions to make to achieve their end. The consequences and scale of what they are entering a war over is so much greater, and in a game where everyone else doesn't play by the rules and has their own agendas, I do feel like he's going to have to adopt kind of an insane attitude at times as well to survive, although hopefully Dorian will be a bit more rational and calm than Aelin has been.
I feel so conflicted about this because I know Dorian's thoughts here are correct. The fate of the entire world is at stake, and they will have to lie and cheat and steal to save the world, and it will probably be justified. But at the same time, what they're doing is fucked up. And in the moment, it's hard to say, yeah, this was the wrong thing to do for the right reason. I feel like there's always a cost as well. And we'll talk more about this too. And I think this will be a growing theme. Like, yes, I did this and it achieved this end, but what was the cost to my soul or to all the men that died, all of Rolfe's men? You know, there's a balance. I feel like that's part of what makes it so interesting, honestly, is this internal conflict.
Specifically, this thought stuck out when Dorian thinks it would be a woman willing to gamble with an entire island full of people to get what she needed to save them all. A woman whose friends were equally willing to play along, to rip their souls to shreds if it meant saving the greater population. They knew the weight of the lives panicking around them if they gambled wrong. That's heavy to think about. But I did have a question. Do you think, had Rolfe not agreed, Aelin would have left them all to die?
Okay, so I will answer your question, then I'll give my TED Talk about Aelin's choices here. I do not think they would have left all those innocent people to die. It's not in Aelin's nature to let people suffer on her behalf, especially innocent people. I think she would have carried the bluff all the way to the end. I think it's very possible she would have left the tavern, got on the small skiff, and made it all the way to the ship before she was just kidding, okay, you know? But I do think she would have swooped in at the last moment because from a strategy perspective, then she could have told Rolfe, you owe me for saving Skull's Bay. And so I think she was hoping it wouldn't come to that, but either way, she could have leveraged it to her favor. All right, it's now time for my TED Talk about this plan, so buckle up for another session of unpopular opinions. I'm rapidly discovering with Aelin that she is not going to be an FMC that can do no wrong. I feel like in a lot of fantasy books, the main character, quote unquote, always does the right thing. You know what I mean? Everything they do is with goodness in their heart. And Aelin Ashford Galathinius is not going to be one of those main characters. Honestly, that's exciting and hard for me because it makes Aelin such a complex character. And I get to have these internal debates about Aelin and her choices. I said this in the last episode, but I think basically everything Aelin has done in Skull's Bay is fucked up. I've said that multiple times, and I really feel that way. The way she treated Rolfe in the beginning was bad. And then she literally risked the lives of everyone and the total destruction of people's homes and livelihoods, all so that she could gain Rolfe's armada and his men. And not only did she risk their deaths, but she risked them being infected by valg, which is a horrible fate. It's not even just oh, they're going to be killed, in a battle. the Valg would have taken them over. Okay. And there are men, women, children there. Like, think of where you live and then someone risking your fate all for a chance at having an army, I know I said this at the top of the episode, but in this instance, I cannot say that I feel the ends justified the means. I think that this plan was not thought out. And I think it was ultimately too risky. I think there were other ways, there were other avenues she could have leveraged, and I'm not supportive. And I'm not just saying that because of everything that happened with Deanna and the sea wyverns and all of that. Obviously, we couldn't have predicted that. But isn't that kind of the point? With Erawan, you can't predict what's going to happen, so you need to be extra cautious. And so I think Aelin is going to carry this lesson with her when she's making future decisions, because this went very, very badly.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree that Aelin has never been a character who, like, you look at all of her actions and you're like, oh, that was the best morally good thing. She is thinking of people's intentions, but she's a very morally gray character. But I like that about her, even though, yeah, I side-eye some of her plans at times because I'm like, was that really the best decision? No. But you know that she's thinking about everything from a very different place. Just, I guess, thinking about her role with the gods and kind of being this chosen character, right? What she's thinking about is different than what everyone else may be thinking about. Like, even with Rolfe, right? Like, she needs his armada and all that stuff. But I guess more than that, she really needs his magical map hands to help her locate objects that she needs because the gods are telling her that she needs to get those things. And so there's all these layers to all this stuff that goes on. But as a whole, I agree that this whole plan was just very rash and not well planned, even if her intent wasn't necessarily to just let Skulls Bay entirely burn like that. The possibility of that is probably something that she should have considered more heavily before moving forward with this plan. So Aelin starts giving out commands. She has Rowan, Lysandra, Fenris, and Gavriel go with her, while Aelin is sent to the Northern Watchtower to man the harpoon. Oh wait, why did I call it a harpoon? It's a crossbow. It's similar enough. Crossbow.
Same thing.
Yeah. But to keep Dorian as safe as possible, she orders him to the Southern Watchtower with instructions to take any forces that try and cross the chain out. I think this is going to be a really big moment for Dorian, who will use his magic in a battle for the first time ever and to use it against true enemies. But I also found it really symbolic that she gives Dorian Damaris, because Dorian is officially entering this generational fight now too. Obviously nothing happens with the sword in this set of chapters, but I do wonder if it would respond magically in some way to Dorian, since, Gavin is his ancestor and he originally used the sword against Erawan and all of that stuff too. So
yeah, that's a really good point. I wonder if he'll end up having to use it like Gavin did in a big battle against Erawan, and maybe the sword plus Dorian being a descendant of Gavin will somehow manifest in a, parallel moment of magic and greatness, seeing truth. Exactly. I hadn't thought about that, but I like that idea.
Aelin asks Rolfe for iron chains as an additional check should things get out of control, and we learn Aelin and Rowan plan to sail straight into, quote, the heart of the enemy fleet and blow them all out of the water. It's definitely safe to say I was sweating by this point, because on a first read, you're like, why? What is your plan? What are you doing? I don't know what's going on. I don't like it.
Oh, same. I was like, chains? What the fuck do you need chains for? I was like, Aelin, excuse me, what do you mean if your magic gets out of control? I felt like that Jennifer Lawrence meme where she's like, what do you mean? What do you mean?
Yeah.
I felt just like her.
So that concludes chapter 33. Moving on to chapter 34. We changed to Aelin's POV, who was well aware that, quote, she was a liar and a murderer and a thief and had a feeling she'd be called much worse by the end of this war.
I will say in Aelin's defense, I think she knows what she did was wrong. I do really appreciate that she's not trying to justify her actions as the quote-unquote right thing to do.
But more importantly, she knew that the message from all of this would not be for Morath, but to the world, to any potential allies watching this continent, contemplating if it was indeed a lost cause. Today, her message would thunder across the realms. So this really is a hugely important message to everyone else across the continent. I think the first event when she fought General Narok is still sort of this myth to a lot of people, but when she defeats Erawan again in this instance, I think it will help solidify, A, that she is not this rumored rebel princess doing whatever she wants. B, she is powerful enough and willing to fight against Erawan for everyone. And C, that failing to ally with her would be a huge mistake for other kingdoms and all that stuff. So
I also got chills when she thought, and if those allies did not join with her, she wanted them to think of today and of what she would do and wonder if they might find her on their shores, in their harbors one day too. They had not come 10 years ago, and she wanted them to know she had not forgotten it. And this just really gave me anticipatory shivers because she really is a force of nature.
Aelin turns to Lysandra next, and we are about to see, that's SEA, what creature she has been studying to become. I had to explain it because you can't see that I wrote it out like that.
I saw. You're very clever. I like that.
Thank you. But Aelin simply tells her good hunting before they all scatter for the respective posts. And I was like, damn, what a line. Good hunting. That's all you have to say.
Good hunting. Well, she can't really say anything else.
I know.
She can't give it away. But still, I know it's so hard because you're like your best friend and you're like, good hunting. Goodbye. And you're like, no.
You can really feel the tension of the scene. Aelin takes off for the tower while Gabriel stares after him, and then everyone else boards the sea dragon ship. Then Rolfe comes out with the iron chains. In my mind, all of this just looks like really foreboding and epic.
Oh my gosh, yes. The description of all of them rolling up onto the sea dragon was so good. You know that they just look so badass and terrifying and also hot. Super hot.
Can't forget that.
Can't forget that part. That's right.
So I guess now that I read it a second time, this is first making it clear Aelin is worried that she could easily lose control with the iron chains and all. And second, it's clear foreshadowing that she will because she thinks iron would provide a bite and anchor to remind her who she was, what she was. Iron would keep her tethered when the sheer vastness of her magic, of Rowan's magic, threatened to sweep her away.
I feel so dumb. It was literally not until this moment that I remembered that they were Karanom and could share power. And I was like, oh, duh, Addison. I totally forgot that.
So seeing that Dorian and Aelin had arrived at their respective watchtowers, Aelin gives the go-ahead for Lysandra to turn into a sea dragon. I was so excited to see this actually happen because, I don't know, it's so cool that she can turn into this. The possibilities are endless as a shifter,
Also, someone has to say it. Lorraine, you were totally right. You called that shit so early on. So excellent work, detective.
Thank you. And with the Mycenaean prophecy in mind as well about not returning until the sea dragons did, I definitely think they are going to, reveal themselves soon. I've said that a bunch of times now, so I'll shut up after this. But one of my questions is whether or not we're actually going to see real sea dragons.
I also wonder that too. It's great that Lysandra can do this, but it really took a toll on her. And it's just not realistic for her to continue doing that. We need for real sea dragons to contend with Erawan sea wyverns. So I am really curious about that as well.
I did get a bit nervous when it said, "Come on, Lysandra," Aelin breathed and sent a prayer to Themis, the goddess of wild things, to keep the shifter swift and unfaltering beneath the waves. Because they are really heavily relying on Lysandra being able to take down the sea wyverns, which is an enormous task in itself. And that was even before we see that the 2 sea wyverns they know of are technically still babies, It's We changed to Aideen's perspective, who prepared himself to take control of the giant. I keep saying harpoon. I don't know why I kept writing that.
I know. Now I'm trying to remember. I'm like, did they say harpoon in the book? But I don't think that they
said
did.
Crossbow. Okay, anyways, the crossbow and assesses the surrounding bay as a good general would. I thought it was so funny when he sees Lysandra in the water, despite the tension of everything. And it said, Aideen's heart stopped dead. It's a sea dragon, he managed to say. And then after that, he realizes that Aelin's third reasoning behind why they went to Ilium, and he thinks the 2 of them, oh, those crafty scheming devils, a queen of legends indeed.
Poor Aelin. I feel like he's always the third wheel, just like in Queen of Shadows. He's always on the outside.
The scene ends when Aelin confirms for the sentries that yes, that sea dragon would be defending them. We next change to Lysandra in her sea dragon form, who contemplates her mission while scouting for a place to stake out. I am so impressed with Lysandra, who has been reading about the long-forgotten creatures in addition to studying the carvings of them in Brandon's temple for quite a while now. It stuck out to me when she thinks because her friend had known that strong-arming Rolfe with the Mycenaeans would only get them so far, but if they were to wield the power of myth instead, its people might rally around it, and with a home to finally offer them among these islands and in Terracin. I feel like this gave some further insight into why Aelin did what she did. I feel like this plays into this idea of Aelin being prophetic in a way. Aelin is playing on the idea that people like the Mycenaeans have to kind of see to believe and basically show them that something that was probably thought of as impossible or long gone at this point is in fact still possible thanks to Lysandra. And so by fulfilling the prophecy about the return of the sea dragons, Aelin is also kind of legitimizing herself as a chosen force that can give them all an opportunity to finally return home.
And thank God that she has Lysandra on her side to be able to do that. It seems like being able to shift into quite literally any creature has and will continue to come in handy in so many ways, not just for fighting, but for things like this with the Mycenaeans. As you pointed out, it's super symbolically important. And I mean, she literally fulfilled a prophecy using Lysandra, you know? So I feel like that is an invaluable skill to have.
On the other hand, I definitely continue to stress for Lysandra when she thinks about the sea wyverns and it says they would not fight with morals or codes. They would fight to the death and fight for survival. There would be no mercy, no compassion. I feel like this is especially scary because the sea wyverns are made creatures by Erawan. They are not natural born animals or creatures or whatever, but instead specifically created to be these vicious, bloodthirsty counterparts to sea dragons.
I feel like they're kind of these mindless killing creatures that would kill themselves in the process of trying to destroy their targets, which we see one of the sea wyverns essentially do later. Whereas you think of how Lysandra would fight, she's going to use logic and emotion because she is not a creature. She's a human being in a creature's body.
Right. Also, this is not important, but I did wonder if it would be possible for some of these sea wyverns to turn out to be different. Sort of like how Abraxos, despite being a made creature as a wyvern, was an exception to the general nature of other wyverns.
Oh, that's interesting. I had not considered that at all, but I like that idea. I hope so.
I know.
It's
probably unlikely, but it was just a side thought. To close this chapter out, we get another shiver-inducing line when Lysandra hunkers down in the reef shelf just outside of the island she'd picked to stake out in, and it simply said, "So she began her death vigil."
Oh, I got chills during that part. I love when SJM ends chapters like that. You're just like, ooh.
And so that's chapter 34. Moving on to chapter 35. All right. So I hope everyone is strapped in because literally what a crazy next few set of chapters. I just cannot believe what happened, especially because I did not see it coming at all. And now I would officially like to add Deanna to our ever-growing fuck you list because this was wild.
Dude, never in a million years could I have predicted where this was going. This was one of those moments where I was reading and let out an audible gasp. I was like, what?
Yep.
Like jaw hit the floor. And I started reading so fast, I was losing comprehension, but I didn't even care because I was just like, what is happening? Because I don't even feel like that was hinted or foreshadowed. You know, it just like, you're like, whoa, what? Am I reading this correctly? There's no way, but I was.
Crazy. So the sea dragon ship makes it past the shipbreaker chain and out of range of the other ships. Aelin and Rowan begin preparing for their crazy-ass plan. I did know that Aelin is wearing the wyrdkey, which she feels murmur in response to the dark magic of the valg out on the horizon. And, you know, just hold on to that tidbit because we're going to talk about it in a bit. Aelin and Rowan begin chaining themselves to the iron chains while explaining to Rolfe that he'd been in charge of letting them know when the valg were close to see, quote, the whites of their eyes, and then anchoring the ship to swing them around so the mast wouldn't be in the way when they unleash their power. We learn that Aelin has been spiraling into her power for several days, and the pulse of her power that she sent out had been both a way to take off the power's full edge and make Rolfe piss himself.
Most important part there.
In addition, Aelin strategically timed everything to ensure they'd be unleashing their power at noon when Mala's heir would be at her most powerful. And it seems like Aelin is sort of repeating what she'd done at the end of Queen of Shadows. So I hadn't quite picked up on the nuance of the language on a first read, but on a second read, I feel like this quote should have been the first indication that it wasn't gonna go well. The quote says, "Magic jolted through her, ancient and wicked and cunning, and she arched against him, knees buckling as his cataclysmic power roared into her." And specifically, the use of wicked stuck out to me because I don't think Rowan's magic would normally feel wicked to her ordinarily. But since she's wearing the wyrdkey, I think she was feeling both Rowan's power and the magic of the wyrdkey that was activated when they used their magic.
Oh, that's a really good call out. I did not even pick up on that, but I think you're absolutely right. It does seem odd that Rowan's magic would feel wicked to her because so often it's described that their magic, I guess for lack of a better phrase, they like each other, right? Their magic searches for each other. It's always described like their magic wanted to dance or play or something like that. And so you're right, for it to be wicked is a little bit different.
Foreboding, ominous, not a good sign.
Scary.
Yeah. With the Kiranon bond locked in, Aelin continues to burrow further into the depths of her power. She reflects on the first time she'd broken through her self-imposed limits back in Wendelin against the valg. That process had taken a full day, but in this case, Aelin has spent 3 days, and it says she'd expected it to stop after the first day to hit that bottom. She sensed once before she had not, and now with Rowan's power joining hers, and then it trails off. So one major question that we will definitely discuss, as I alluded to earlier, did Aelin use the wyrdkey knowingly and intentionally for the scheme against the valg? And definitely keep this in mind as we continue because we'll periodically come back to it. My first thought, thinking about that question and then getting back to this quote about how even after 3 days, she still hadn't reached the bottom. I actually wondered if, without realizing it, the wyrdkey had been allowing Aelin to dig even further than she normally would be able to, or perhaps even influencing her power to find greater depths.
I don't think it let her go deeper than was possible for her, but I do think when she got to the part where it's described as like an ashy bottom, and then she felt this urge to dig through the ash and see what slumbered beneath, that definitely felt like the pull or manipulation of a wyrdkey. But I don't think it allowed her to go any deeper than what was possible or normal for her.
And then I guess speaking of that ashy bottom, the quote said, "There was the bottom, the ash-lined bottom, the pit of a dormant crater. Only the feeling of her own feet against the wood deck kept her from sinking into that ash, learning what might slumber beneath it." I feel like this indicated that she still had further to go. It definitely sounds ominous. It kind of sounds like if she'd allowed herself to go into the ash, that could have sucked her into this ancient, endless depths of her magic, maybe even cause her to be completely consumed by her magic. Because I feel like that's one of the core things with magic wielders, right? That's kind of what burnout is, being completely consumed by the magic that you have and losing all control over it. And I feel like that's kind of what the wyrdkey was drawing her into potentially as well. So next, Rowan tells Aelin to go easy, sensing that she was perhaps drawing too far, and at this point, Rolfe gives the initial warning. Rowan instructs Aelin to aim for the middle, and then at Rolfe's command, Aelin draws up the entire force of all the power from the depths, and it says, like a feral beast freed of its leash, her magic erupted. And I was like, oh my god.
Woo, like a volcano.
Yes, literally. At this point, we change to Rowan's POV, who quickly realizes just how much Aelin's power had grown with how much deeper her well went now.
And just a little interesting world-building note, Rowan thinks the well had gone deeper than before. It was easy to forget she was still growing, but her power would mature with her. And this was really interesting to me because I did not realize her magic would continue to grow and expand. And now I wonder if/when that will stop, at what age, if/when she settles, if that will impact it. There's a lot of questions I have here because, I guess I kind of knew that, but it didn't occur to me until he pointed it out that despite her incredibly vast power, it will still continue to grow. And also, that makes her incredibly more terrifying.
When Aelin unleashes her, quote, pillar of flame, it erupts into the sky and it's described higher. That column of flame swirled, a maelstrom of death and life and rebirth. And I don't know about you, But that sounds like some all-powerful god type of description, referring to how the power is described, right? And that's hinting, of course, as to what is about to happen to Aelin. While the Valg do go fleeing at the sight of this, Rowan begins to panic at the expanding pillar of flame and Aelin's increasing loss of control. And when he tugs on the bond, he feels a beast that had opened an eye, a beast that spoke in the tongue of 1,000 worlds. Ice flooded his veins. She was wearing the wyrdkey. Oh, as soon as we read that on a first read, the only note that I had in my Kindle for this was, oh, fuck. That's like literally all I wrote.
That is the most perfect and appropriate note for that moment, I think. So excellent analysis there.
Thank you.
I do have to say that SJM did such an incredible job with the writing in the scene. The way this is all described is absolutely breathtaking and also nightmare-inducing.
Yes, I 1000% agree with that. Retweet. Thinking about the question about whether or not Aelin did intentionally use the wyrdkey. In this case, as these events are unfolding, I feel like she did not. Because we see that Rowan realizes in this moment something very bad is happening and that he pieces together that she's wearing the wyrdkey and everything. And while it's definitely not unusual for Aelin to leave people out of her plans, I am not sure using a literal wyrdkey is something she would hide from Rowan. That is the most risky thing that she could ever possibly do. On the other hand, if she didn't mean to use it, then I guess why wear it at all? I don't know.
So I agree that I don't think Aelin intentionally used the wyrdkey. Aelin understands exactly how dangerous a wyrdkey can be. There are a lot of allusions and descriptions of the quote-unquote cost of using a wyrdkey. They never specify what that means, but you can tell it's something Aelin would never intentionally risk. To answer your last question, I think she was wearing it because she always does. She always wears the Amulet of Orinth. And I think her justification for that has always been a power that big and important cannot be left somewhere, even if it's deemed safe. So the safest place for Aelin to wear that is on her person. And I do think, honestly, in the back of Aelin's mind, when push comes to shove, if it was like her versus Erawan, she would consider using the wyrdkey. I mean, if it's literally life or death for her, I don't think that she wore it intentionally with any intent or, even entertaining the possibility of using it in the battle. I think it's just coincidental she's wearing it in this moment.
So by this point, Rowan is freaking out. And so am I, as I'm sure all of us were. I just thought it was so crazy, especially this line when it said, the wyrdkey's magic burst through, revealing a roiling molten core of magic beneath it, as if it were the fiery heart of Mala herself. So from reading this part, you definitely feel like Mala's power is coming through thanks to the sun being the strongest, the Caradon bond, and the wyrdkey seeming to amplify everything. And you're kind of freaking out. But also at this point, I was still kind of like, well, maybe it's Mala's power, right? That's good. That's what we wanted. But nope, that was wrong. Yep. That's not what happened. I was like, damn it.
Yes, for one brief fleeting moment, you're like, okay, we're going to be okay. You're like, Mala is Firebringer and Aelin's the great, great, great something to her. And then you realize very quickly it is in fact not Mala. Not even a little bit.
So Rolfe roars for Aelin to fire on the Valg, but the pillar of fire shoots back into Aelin, searing Rowan's very soul, and then she tore the last remnants of his power from him. This, of course, is when we realize it was not Aelin, it was Deanna.
Freaking Deanna, god damn it. Deanna. I absolutely love this little part where it says, that's not Aelin, Fenris breathed. Because I can see that so vividly in my mind. Fenris, who's always just joking and lighthearted, gets really serious, and he's like, guys, that's not Aelin for real this time.
Yeah.
I don't know, I could just see it really vividly in my mind, and I thought it was honestly kind of funny in a way.
Yeah. So at this point, basically all the power at play has fully merged, and then this is when Deanna fully takes over. And it says the creature that stared out through Aelin's eyes rolled her fingers into a fist. Light leaked through her clenched fingers, cold white light. Tendrils flickered, silver flame. First of all, King Prawn. Second of all, a court of silver flames, anyone? That's what it immediately made me think of.
We will not be giving any spoilage for A Court of Silver Flames, but I mean, the title of the book has silver flames in it. So I think you guys can see what we're going for. But let's just say if you know, you know, and we will definitely be bookmarking this for a future Massverse discussion.
Tangent aside, Deanna comes prepared with a message and she says every key has a lock. Tell the queen who was promised to retrieve it soon, for all the allies in the world shall make no difference if she does not wield the lock. If she does not, put those keys back with it. Tell her flame and iron, together bound, merge into silver to learn what must be found. A mere step is all it shall take. So I'm going to start with analyzing her message.
The first line is, every key has a lock. This seems pretty obvious, but it did make me wonder if each individual word key has its own specific lock. But also, Brandon and Deanna both referred to it as the lock, implying it's only one. So that's where I'm going to stick for headcanon, but it did make me wonder.
So I feel like Deanna is warning Aelin that her very first priority needs to be to get the lock, presumably because that is the only way to seal the gate once and for all once the keys are back in it as well. And then when she says, tell her flame and iron, together bound, merge into silver to learn what must be found, I think that is indicating her power will need to combine with something or someone else possibly to find the lock, or maybe even to use the word gate itself. We speculated that perhaps Dorian will be involved with the word keys and the word gate somehow, so maybe this is adding to that theory. It could also just be in reference to Aelin's power melding with an iron material of some sort, so I don't know.
Yes? Question mark? I mean, of course we don't know, obviously, but I really keyed in on pun intended there. I forgot I wrote that. When she said, merge into silver to learn what must be found. And so my thought is, what else could Aelin possibly need to find after she finds the lock? Like,
right.
I don't know. That really stuck out to me. I'm like, we have to find something else also after the lock, because it seems like the implication is there's more than one. I don't know. I was confused.
Right.
I think I'm confusing myself now. Now I don't know.
No, yeah, that's a good point. I'm confused too. So now, as far as referring to Aelin as the queen who was promised, I feel like there's two ways you can read that. You can either read it prophetically or also as a warning. Personally, I kind of feel like you're meant to think Aelin was promised to be the one who could destroy Erawan, but seeing what Deanna tries to do and how she definitely seems more nefarious in this moment, I kind of feel like it's actually supposed to be a warning or a reminder that Aelin was promised to be the sacrifice, or maybe even like promised to the gods or something like that.
To me, it reads prophetically in that we know Aelin purposely imprisoned Erawan until the third act and all the players in the unfinished game were back. Aelin being a descendant of Brandon and having Mala's power just seems too perfect to not be the quote-unquote queen who was promised. And so to me, I really read it prophetically in that way. The last line also stood out to me when Deanna says, a mere step is all it shall take. Unfortunately, I got absolutely nothing on that. Honestly, the only place my mind went, it was after reading the end of the set of chapters, is how Fenris can teleport. So he can take one step, which will take him to a further distance. But I got really nothing on the connection there. But I feel like that is important, but I don't know why.
What if it's like a mere step into, because remember, like the whole point is to use the lock with the word keys and the word gate, which is like a portal. So what if it's like, take a step into the portal, which would actually go into the sacrifice thing, because they're gonna like nab her forever.
No, they can't have Aelin. No, I mean, that definitely is a possibility. To me, that implies some sort of like portal teleportation, right? You take one step and you're in a totally different place. Well,
right.
What constitutes that? Yeah, so just gonna bookmark that for later.
Anyways, after Deanna's message, Rowan realizes that the power she was getting ready to unleash was so cold it burned, realizing it was the cold of the stars, the cold of stolen light, not wildfire, but moonfire. So immediately my brain thought of Shadowfire because it kind of sounds similar. It made me wonder if this power, which seems like the balance to Mala's power, and that actually does kind of make sense since Deanna was considered the eternal rival to Mala, that this is what Erawan was possibly trying to recreate with Kaltain, you know? So next we changed to Aelin's perspective, which offered some really interesting insight into what actually happened. Aelin describes herself as being there in one moment, and then in the next, she was shoved aside, locked into a box with no key, and the power was not hers. Her body was not hers. Her name was not hers. And I was like, OMG, why is this what Nameless in my price actually means? This whole time, Nameless is my price was like a warning that Aelin actually is meant to be sacrificed and used by the gods. Therefore, she is not really anyone.
You honestly totally blew my mind. Nameless is my price lives rent free in my head, but it's been a while since it's been brought back up for me. So when I read this, I was like, huh? I don't know. I still think back on that about what Maeve told her back in Airfire and how it's because Brandon was a bastard and essentially had no title in anything. I definitely do not think that is the whole story, but I still think that plays a role, so that kind of negates that. But I don't know what to think anymore. I'm not okay.
Too much.
I have to point out that this interaction was sort of foreshadowed back in Throne of Glass in chapter 37 during the Yulma service. And Aelin, then Selena, was gifted with Deanna's blessing. And little did we know it was, in fact, not a blessing at all, but rather an omen.
It's like a warning. She's like, I'm hunting you. But
yes. Especially when she thinks that she had not been protected, but hunted by her. I was like, like that just kind of echoes in my mind, and it really makes you question a lot of the intention of the gods and kind of makes you question everything that has led Aelin to this point.
Yes. So this, of course, confirms that Deanna is not a nice god. Hell nah. She is nefarious and bad. It feels like Deanna intentionally waited to come in and take over Aelin, or just, I don't know, generally come into this world. And she took this opportunity to do just that. I don't know. I do feel like this was some sort of trap by Deanna. That's not confirmed, but that's what it feels like to me right now. In addition, I think Deanna was warning Aelin not to disobey what she's been told to do. Kind of as I posed earlier, I do have to wonder if Mala is the same way. What about the other gods? Were they in on this? Or was, Deanna acting independently in this case? So lots of questions for the gods. So just when you think it couldn't get any worse, it does. Deanna pivots Aelin's body toward the town instead of the freaking valg, and just as she is about to unleash moonfire on it, Rowan steps into the path, bringing Aelin back to herself. Ah, the power of love. Thank God. Not thank God. I don't know who to thank for that.
I was going to say thank you, Rowan. Yeah, I was going to say, I was like, don't thank the gods. We don't like them right now. Anyway, something that I absolutely loved is when Aelin thinks a name clanged through her as he hurled himself in the path of that fist, that moonfire. Not just to save those innocents in the city, but to spare her soul from the agony if she destroyed them all. And it just breaks me that Rowan knows Aelin well enough and loves her enough to risk his life, not just to save all those people, but to save her soul. And guys, I just can't. I can't.
Oh. Rowan.
I know. Rowan.
Another quote that stuck out to me was when it said, and Aelin Galathinius remembered her own name as she shattered through the cage that goddess had shoved her into, as she grabbed that goddess by the damn throat and hurled her out through that gaping hole where she had infiltrated her and sealed it. Oh, damn. What a move, Aelin. And I guess thank the word that they're mates, supposedly, because Deanna was about to fuck up School's Bay.
Honestly, it is insane to me that Aelin grabbed a literal goddess by the throat and kicked her out of her body. Aelin really is a calamity. How powerful do you have to be to do that, right?
I don't know.
She crazy.
So Aelin returns back to her body and has literally a split second to redirect her hand. The power misses Rowan but takes out the ship beneath them and the center and left flank of the Dark Fleet and the outer edge of the island behind it. I'm still not emotionally recovered from this chapter, but it doesn't even get better from here, because the next two chapters gave me even more anxiety, so we're not at the end yet. But once again, to go back to the question of did Aelin intentionally use the wyrdkey, I think I am ultimately leaning toward no at this point. Maybe she just figured it might protect them or something against the valg, but I definitely don't think she intended to harness its power necessarily. Instead, I think the wyrdkey kind of acted of its own accord and chose to respond to Aelin's power. And then once that happened, it was just like completely out of Aelin's control because now she was dealing with a literal god. The main counter I do have to my own thought here, though, is if I am going to say that she used it intentionally to call the valg in the first place, then it stands to reason that maybe she thought to use it again, this time as an amplifier of her magic. Now, if she did intentionally use it, then I think that was literally so crazy and dumb because she knows the keys are incredibly powerful and TBH doesn't even really know how they work. So it would be super reckless to use them without knowing what could happen if you did. So I guess if I'm going to say that she didn't use it in this case, then maybe I need to backtrack and be like, she probably didn't intend to use them at all.
I still say no. I don't think she used it intentionally at any time, especially because later in her thoughts, she notes that she knew the valg on the east side of Skulls Bay would be too fearful of their master to let her slip through their fingers. And I think she just used her own magic, which of course would have a very distinct, I guess, signature, I'll call it, to bait the valg. And so I just really don't think that she did.
Also, I am very excited because this means we now actually have met one of the gods.
Ooh.
Ha ha ha. So they did come
True
into
dat.
play in real life. Unfortunately, I don't like this one, but maybe we can try again.
Yeah.
The different one.
Don't put me down for cardio, okay? That's going to be a hard no for me. I already have a deep mistrust for the gods, and this has now sealed the deal. So I don't want to fuck with any of them. Don't trust them. Don't need them.
Maybe
okay?
Mala and Aneth. Aneth
Maybe
is
Temis.
interesting. Yeah, Temis. Definitely not Deanna.
No.
So.
Yeah. Agreed.
But anyways, okay. So that ends chapter 35. Moving on to chapter 36. As Aelin continues coming back to herself while drifting in the water, she thinks Deanna. She didn't know how, didn't know why, the queen who was promised. And then she immediately begins to panic and thinks, what had she done? What had she done? What had she done? So one thing we do know for sure is that Aelin was as surprised as we were to see Deanna show up and literally take over her body. But I will say her reaction of shock, confusion, and devastation adds to the likelihood that she didn't intentionally use the wyrdkey on purpose.
I agree. Everyone seems completely shocked and unprepared for this possibility. Honestly, I cannot wait for the next set of chapters where they discuss what the hell just happened because we need some damn answers. So I need them all to regroup, debrief, and figure out what is going on.
Fenris helps steady her, and I did note that Fenris refers to her as Majesty. Side-eye at that. But I also thought that as soon as she gets over the initial shock, she thinks later she'd deal with that running goddess who had thought to use her like some temple priestess. Later, she'd contemplate how she'd tread through every world to find Deanna and make her pay. And Aelin is obviously pissed, but it's kind of funny that she's bold enough to think about revenge against a god, you know?
I mean, if anyone could do it and would do it, it would definitely be Aelin. So not totally off the table for me.
We also get a little snippet of Fenris's magic when it says he'd moved them somehow, jumped between distances, judging by the wholly different flotsam spinning around them. So I guess Fenris has the ability to winnow, teleport, whatever you want to call it, which is super cool and definitely useful if you think about it, because I feel like Aelin's for sure going to capitalize on this skill somehow to either help them transport quickly to somewhere or maybe perhaps retrieve something they need, like the lock, for example.
I was definitely excited by this because this is the first time we're introduced to this kind of magic in this series. I also wondered if Fenris was going to be critical in Aelin retrieving the lock, as you said, because it might be in some impossible place that she'll need to get to, or I don't know, there may be some kind of barrier or magical or otherwise that she'll need to get past safely, and Fenris seems like a pretty good way to do that.
It could even be like life-saving at a last moment, right? Like something's about to happen to her and then like he'll just like yank her with him somewhere. You know what I mean? So yeah, there's a lot of interesting possibilities for Fenris. And
ooh, it would be good for rescues too.
Yeah.
Like if any of them get captured and he can just like, you know,
right.
morph in and out of space and time.
Yeah, pretty much. So Fenris gets Aelin closer to the reef where she is relieved to see Rowan is alive and well, along with Gavriel. But unfortunately, many people were not, as she notes, blood-stained water from the bodies everywhere. Most of Erawan's fleet was now destroyed, except for 3 remaining ships, which were coming straight toward them now. And once back at the shore, Aelin reassures Rowan that she was fine and that she was herself again. But with everyone now out of magic, all they could do was wait on the shore or risk the sea wyverns who were down underwater with Lysandra. We change to Lysandra's perspective, who quickly realized something had gone horribly wrong. I also noted that it says Lysandra could have sworn the feral wild presence, who had never once forgotten her, had ducked into her long shadow as the world above exploded. I think it's safe to say that if Aelin is watched by two gods, one of which who is definitely not good, then Manon being watched by the three-faced goddess and Alid being watched by Aneth, I'd say it's definitely safe to say at this point that Lysandra is being watched over and guided by Themis.
I agree. And I thought this quote was really interesting because it seemed to indicate that even Themis's presence hid in fear when Deanna inhabited Aelin's body. I don't know if there's like a hierarchical rank of gods and their power, but it seems like Deanna ranks above Themis is what it kind of seemed like, just based on this small description.
So Lysandra's first mission is to help Rolfe and one of his men. So she swims to them and tows them to a rocky shelf. And on her way back to get more survivors from the wreckage, she sees clouds of blood from the sea wyverns, who feasted on the men as well as the 3 remaining ships of Erawan's forces. So this is definitely where my anxiety skyrocketed because Lysandra is literally the hero of the next 2 chapters. She quickly takes down one of the remaining ships, but just before she reaches the next one, the sea wyverns attack, and one of them tears straight into her body. And let's take a moment to survey the sea wyverns. Lysandra notes that they are nearly double her size, with a serpentine body, fins, a huge mouth of hooked teeth for clamping down and shredding. And that is all absolutely terrifying, but the worst part is that, again, these are just the baby ones.
Oh my gosh, I know. This chapter is really intense. But honestly, at this point, I wasn't too worried for Lysandra. I felt pretty confident she was going to take down the ships and the sea wyverns. But then at the end of the chapter, the last line had me panicking. I was like, those are just the baby ones? You mean the ones that almost killed her the first time around? I was like, oh, okay. Okay.
Collecting herself, Lysandra focuses on her mission at hand to take down the wyverns and the remaining ships, leading the sea wyverns into a game of chase. I actually thought this was such a clever trick. She leads them to a sandbar where, after flinging herself up onto it, she turns around and pounces on the wyvern that had jumped onto the sandbar after her. She kills it with a fabulous neck chomp tail stab combo. And we have 1 down, 1 to go, or so we thought.
We thought wrong.
So wrong. Seeing that the second wyvern was beelining to the reef where Aelin, Rowan, Gabrielle, and Venice were stranded, Lysandra chases in pursuit. The sea wyvern was fast, but Lysandra is faster. Yeehaw! And she takes that one down and then gets a 2-for-1 deal by slamming the sea wyvern into one of Erawan's ships, successfully taking down both.
I like when you say yeehaw.
So we all can give a collective sigh of relief because it can't get any worse, right? Wrong. Aelin begins screaming in warning, and that's when Lysandra sees 3 massive forms waging through the waves, aiming right for her. Full-blown panic attack by this point because I was like, no, how can there be 3 more of them and a whole other boat for her to destroy alone? Yeah, I was really, really panicking for her life. And by this point, I was like, oh shit, is Lysandra gonna die?
Oh, and not only that, but she could already feel her magic depleting, and she was approaching exhaustion before those 3 sea wyverns showed up. And so I feel like you're kind of like, okay, Asha was trying to scare me, but I'm not scared. And then she's like, but wait, you should be. And you really do worry for Lysandra's fate. I mean, I think that's a very reasonable fear at this point.
So that ends chapter 36. Moving on to chapter 37. We switch to Adian's perspective, who watches the very stacked odds against Lysandra from his northern watchtower. He realizes that the first 2 wyverns hadn't been full-grown, and instead they'd just been bait for the larger trap with 3 full-grown sea wyverns. Sea wyverns that Rolfe had claimed would go to the ends of the earth to slaughter whoever killed their offspring. And they're 3 times the size of Lysandra. Yeah, I am not even kidding when I say that on a first read. My jaw was literally in Bikini Bottom. And then I was like, no, scratch that. It's in the Mariana Trench. Because I just could not fathom how she was going to get out of this. And the sentries were telling Aelin she's dead and all that stuff, and I was like, no.
And if history has proven anything, it's that SJM does not give a fuck about my feelings. And so I'm thinking, she's really going to do it. She's going to hurt my damn feelings right now and kill Lysandra. I was ready for it. I mean, I wasn't, but I was like, okay, I need to prepare myself. Like, this is going to be the end.
Same. Thankfully, Aelin had no intention of listening to the sentries and slips into Aedian Ash River, commanding general of the Bane. Not the Bane anymore, but... So,
Hot. Still my boyfriend. You cannot have him.
We'll see about that. We'll see.
Okay.
From the other watchtower, Dorian signals at Lysandra to come to him, presumably so he can use his magic against the sea wyverns, but she instead swims directly at the three bulls, and for the first time, Aelin hated his cousin. He hated Aelin for asking this of Lysandra, both to defend them and to secure the Mycenaeans to fight for Terrasen. Hated the people who had left such scars on the shifter that Lysandra was so willing to throw her life away. Hated himself for being stuck in this useless tower with a war machine only capable for firing one shot at a time. This was such a tough line to read, but I really don't blame him because I kind of felt the same way. On the other hand, with Lysandra being a shifter and therefore the only one capable of becoming anything that could take on the sea wyverns in the water, then it automatically puts her in the line of fire. I guess realistically, Erawan had this trap planned anyway with the sea wyverns, so regardless of whether things went to shit from above water, I feel like below water was still going to be the same for Lysandra. But it's particularly hard to watch because, to everyone else, there's not much they can do because it's all underwater. And so I would imagine that they all just feel really helpless. That doesn't mean that I like any single part of the situation, but it is what it is, I guess, right?
I agree. I can't imagine what that's like to just be standing there and you're just like, well, just watch your friend literally fight to the death and odds that are highly stacked against them. So it's not a good situation.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta say, I'm with Andy on this one. I think his feelings and his read on the situation are so accurate here, and it's painful, right? I am mad at Aelin for doing this. I'm mad at the people who hurt Lysandra that made her so willing to risk her life all the time. And as I said at the top of the episode, I feel like Aelin gravely miscalculated her plan. And it almost cost Lysandra her life. I think that's going to haunt Aelin. I really do. It's going to haunt me.
So while we're all stressing, Lysandra swims on with a plan. She suddenly veers left, causing the sea wyverns to break formation, and she goes straight for Erawan's last ship. Once again, Lysandra proves herself to be a brilliant strategist. Despite taking multiple enemy arrows, she leaps over the ship, breaking the mast on her way, and when one of the sea wyverns jumps over it, it spikes itself on the broken mast, taking the ship down with it. And I was like, oh my gosh, she's so smart. Next, Lysandra leads the bulls toward Dorian as they dart past, and then Dorian ices the sea wyvern and uses the catapult on the tower to fling a rock at the wyvern, shattering it into pieces. Once she got the second one out of the way, I was like, okay, I think we can do this. I was like, she's gonna make it.
You do feel a little bit of hope restored. And also, how freaking cool was this? Dorian literally froze an entire sea wyvern and then cracked it into 1,000 pieces. That is so freaking cool. I love Dorian's magic. I need more. I want more. I wanted him to train it so bad because I feel like he can do so much more. And I'm just like, I want it.
The last sea wyvern quickly adapts, refusing to follow Lysandra toward Dorian again, and it instead launches broken holes and masts, which do hit their mark. However, Lysandra is not done. After leading it through Valg soldiers in the water, she changes course directly toward Aelin. And I got very excited to hear because I was like, yes, the crossbolt. The whole scene was just so epic. But this final move was literally just a chef's kiss. It was so great. Lysandra swims her little heart out and leaps out of the water in range. The sea wyvern, of course, follows suit, but not so fast to this nasty beast. Aelin fires the crossbolt, spearing the sea wyvern for a kill shot. And I was like, yay! Thank you, Themis, and thank you, Lysandra.
Thank you, Themis, and fuck you, Deanna, okay?
Retweet.
I think that should be the title of this episode. I wish we could put expletives in the title because that's what I would name it.
Anyways, as if all the physical danger wasn't enough, SGM had to hit us with emotional damage as well. Aelin sprints to meet Lysandra at the beach that she'd swam to and begs her, you made it this far, don't die on the rutting beach.
Lorraine, I have to ask, were the tears flowing for you at this point? Because I won't lie, I had actual tears of relief in this moment.
Yes, no, 1000%. I actually made a little reaction video. It's on her TikTok. I was crying at this because I was just like, you had so many emotions coursing through you. You were stressed and then you feel relieved and then you get like, oh my God, it's
stressed
so freaking
again.
Cute. No, I was like, oh my God, Aelin, it's so cute. He loves her. Like you had just excitement over romantic stuff going on too. So it was just everything all at once. Realizing that he had to appeal to Lysandra within, Aelin says the words that release the floodgates of my eyes. He says, the useless sentries in the watchtower are now all half in love with you. One said he wanted to marry you, but you know what I told them? I said, that they didn't stand a chance in hell because I am going to marry you one day. I'll be generous and let you pick when, even if it's 10 years from now or 20, but one day you are going to be my wife. And I was bawling at this point because you're coming down from the emotional turmoil of thinking she was going to die. And now you have Aelin like confessing his love. It was just too much for my little human heart, you know?
When you think about it, I really feel like this should not be romantic given the circumstances, but somehow it totally is. And I can't explain it, but it just works. And I was like, why is this the perfect thing to say in this moment? Because it really shouldn't be, but I loved it.
I did find it kind of funny, though, that despite being like literally on the verge of death, Lysandra, who is still a sea dragon, by the way, just narrows her eyes at him and huffs. Like she's still sassy, even though she's an animal right now. At this point, Aelin, Rowan, and Gabriel and Fenris all get to the beach as well. Unfortunately, Lysandra's body does begin to slowly heal itself as her magic replenishes. Noting how devastated and sorry Aelin was for Lysandra, Aedion thinks his queen knew the cost. It had taken her so damn long to trust any of them to do anything. If Aedion roared at her now, even if he still yearned to, Aelin might never delegate again. Because if Lysandra hadn't been in the water when things had gone so badly, and then it trails off, so I am sure that Aelin is just crushed by everything that happened and feels enormously guilty for letting everything get to this point. And especially because losing her friends and loved ones is exactly the thing that she'd been most afraid of and why she'd been so reluctant to let any of them do anything for her for so long. Unfortunately, I don't think this will be the first or last time her loved ones get close to dying moving forward.
I did appreciate that Aedion was so quick to realize this. This has been a growing theme for Aelin's character in Queen of Shadows. It's mentioned several times that Aelin's real true test as queen will be to let people fight and die for her. And letting Lysandra take a risk this big from the start had to be really hard for Aelin. And then on top of that, for it to go this badly, I'm sure it will haunt Aelin. And I appreciate that Aedion was able to recognize this in this moment. And despite the extreme intensity and emotion, he's able to take a step back and realize that Aelin is already punishing herself and she doesn't need Aedion to pile on top of that.
Aedion demands to know what happened, and when Aelin says she lost control, he quickly pieces together that Aelin had and used the wyrdkey today against the valg.
I honestly cannot wait to see Aedion throw down with Aelin for not including him in the know again. I know I've alluded to this a couple of times, but I feel like Aedion and Aelin are going to have a big fight. I feel like that's what this is all leading up to because, you know, he's told her repeatedly and then everything with Lysandra and now this, and I feel like he's just going to kind of lose his shit, which I kind of feel is justified, honestly. I feel like we're kind of at the point where it's like, Aelin, you gotta communicate.
Rowan snarls at him and Aedion keeps his information to himself for now. And then he agrees to stay with Lysandra until she's recovered enough to shift, while Aelin goes to help with Rolfe. I did take note of when it said a victory, but very nearly a loss. The remnants of the Mycenaeans saved by one of their long-lost sea dragons. Aelin and Lysandra had woven ancient prophecies into tangible fact. I definitely think that they were lucky as hell to have survived today, but thanks to Lysandra, they gave the Mycenaeans a real reason to come back and believe in their cause. This all, I think, weaves really beautifully into the theme of hope and belief that we've seen throughout the story so far. Aelin is a queen, a warrior, and now kind of this myth maker type person that allows everyone to see a way out through the darkness that is Erawan. Hopefully, this will send a massive message to the rest of the continent as long as people don't find out about the wyrdkey and stuff, except too late with Erawan, because I feel like he definitely knows that she has one now.
See, I'm not convinced that he does know, because I'm not convinced he'll figure it out, because who else knows besides Aedion now and Rowan? Maybe Fenris and Gabriel can infer. I'm sure that's going to come up in discussion, especially when we start talking about how Deanna was able to get into Aelin's body. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that information will get back to Erawan. Because remember, there's only allies on the ship when that happens, right? And then everything happens so fast. I know he'll, of course, know something happened, something went down, but he may just assume it's just Aelin and her power. He may infer that she's carrying on with Rowan, and that's obviously bad information for him to know, but I'm not sure he'll instinctively know that she has a wyrdkey in her possession.
Yeah, that's fair. I feel like a lot of people, especially like characters or like magic wielders that are as strong as Erawan, would be able to detect the kind of magic that was released. Because like that was like something crazy for it to merge with the wyrdkey. And so
Fair.
I wonder who else would be able to sense that or something. So yeah, I don't know. I guess we'll see. But before leaving, Aelin apologizes to Aelin, though he does not respond at this time. We shift to a third-party perspective that I found really interesting because it sort of shifts us into thinking of Gavriel and Aelin as their most primal selves. And, you know, lions kind of represent strength, pride, and they can be solitary at times, although normally they are in a pride. And then wolves, on the other hand, represent loyalty, instinct, and they are also animals that tend to be pack-minded. In this scene, Gavriel, the lion, watches Aelin, the wolf, as he stays by Lysandra's side for hours until she is able to shift back into her human form. Aelin then scoops her up and takes her back to town, and we see that Gavriel has been silently and secretly watching the entire time. Keeping that in mind, it's interesting that Gavriel is watching over Aelin and protecting him just as Aelin does for Lysandra. But he does so secretly because I feel like Gavriel is kind of in this weird solitary period of his life. He's in a group working with others and serving Maeve, but he's not really close to any of them. He hasn't quite found his pride until now. And then you contrast that with Aelin, who has very much found his family and operates within a group that he cares about and who in turn care about him as well. And underlying all of that, we know that Aelin is Gavriel's son, and you can just feel that he wants to get to know Aelin, but he can't at this time until Aelin lets him. So for now, he's just kind of like watching his family from afar, you know.
This entire scene was actually very beautifully written and also heartbreaking. I am really enjoying getting more page time with Gavriel, and I really hope we see Aelin and Gavriel work through their issues and build a relationship. It seems that they are both very lonely. They both seem to have at least people, companions, or even people they care about, but I think they're missing the connection of family, right? And so it seems like they could both really use that in their lives. And so I hope that they're able to work past their differences and their issues. And I feel hopeful, that's in the cards. They literally just met for the first time in this set of chapters. We've got a lot of pages to go. So I'm hoping that they'll be able to work it out.
I think they will too. I have a good feeling about it. I really liked the quote that said, 24 years old and already a myth whispered over campfires. Today's events would no doubt be told around fires and lands even the lion had not roamed in all of his centuries. And I feel like this really speaks to Aelin coming into his own legacy and value, something we know he has been worried about in comparison to Gavriel's, legendary record. Gavriel can already see it, and it's clear Aelin is following suit in his own way. And then you also see this contrast with how Gavriel deep down actually worries about Aelin accepting him when it said, and the lion wondered if he himself would ever be mentioned in those whispered stories, if his son would ever allow the world to know who had sired him or even care. And that really broke my heart to read. I do believe Aelin has the right to decide whether to let Gavriel into his life, but I hope he at least listens to what really happened because Gavriel just seems like such a kind-hearted soul, and I just want them to be a family.
I feel like I was not prepared for the action in this set of chapters or the emotional blows because they just kept coming. I hope that we get a break in the next set of chapters because I'm hanging on by a thread. Okay, I'm spent emotionally, so I need some, just calm information. Maybe something good could happen. I don't know. Right. That would be nice.
We'll
but
see.
I doubt that.
So that officially concludes our analysis. So last but not least, we just have our favorite moments to share to close out this episode.
This is probably quite predictable for you guys, but my very first favorite moment was when the lead thought she couldn't even read Gods Above. My next favorite one is a thought from Aelin and where she thinks, and honestly, she wished she'd melted her aunt that day in Doranel. And I don't know why, that's just a really funny sentence when you take it out of context. You're like, who wishes to melt their aunt? But that's Aelin for you.
If Maeve is a valg, it would have been very helpful to have taken her out early, but...
Dude, oh my gosh, I know she's going to live to regret that day.
I know.
Yep.
My next favorite one was from Rowan, and it's when he said, I would have fought for the rest of my life to find a way to return to you again. I knew in the moment you emerged from the valg's darkness and smiled at me through your flames.
Aww. Cute. I like when Aelin challenges Rolfe and she says, I have liberated Ilium from Otterlin. I took back the city, your ancient home for you, for the Mycenaeans. It is yours if you dare to claim your people's inheritance. And you're just like, ooh.
Ooh, I know. My next favorite one was when Aelin thinks her gaze dragged down south to the Red Desert, where another life debt, many life debts, waited for her to claim them.
Oh my God, I cannot wait to see the Silent Assassins. I'm also just deliciously anticipating when she sees Ilias again. Because, they had a little flirty flirt thing, Yeah. I don't think it'll be that big of a deal because they were young, but I feel like he may flirt with her and then Rowan will just be standing behind Aelin and be like, what'd you say? I liked when it said, because Aelin was going to sail that ship right into the heart of the enemy fleet and blow them all out of the water.
Wow.
I know. Wow.
My next favorite one was when she decided she wanted Rowan to call her milady at least once every day.
This is a shared one between Lorraine and I. I love when it said, she was not a rebel princess shattering enemy castles and killing kings. She was a force of nature. She was a calamity and a commander of immortal warriors of legend. I know. Yeah, I was like, yet another one where I was like, ooh, shippers.
The myth herself, coming to life. My next favorite one was from Aelin, and it's when he's thinking about Aelin and Lysandra, and it said, the two of them, oh, those crafty skimming doubles, a queen of legends indeed.
My last year from the same conversation that Aelin has with Lysandra, and he says, because I'm going to marry you one day, I'm going to marry you. I'll even be generous and let you pick when, even if it's 10 years from now or 20, but one day you're going to be my wife. And that would work on me instantly. If I was Alexandra, I would have shifted back immediately and been like, okay, let's go get married right now. I'm good.
Please,
I feel better.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm great now. Thank you so much. Yeah. My next favorite one was in Lysandra's scene when it said, so she began her death vigil.
Oh, yeah. Another one where I was like, ooh.
Yes. I just
did that the entire, My last one is just a little bit lighthearted. It's when Aelin says, Princess Lysandra Asherverse sounds nice, doesn't it? And I like that.
Yeah.
I was like, it does sound nice.
It's so cute. And to end, I guess, kind of on a powerful note, my last favorite one was when it said, Aelin Galathinius remembered her own name as she shadowed through the cage that goddess had shoved her into, as she grabbed that goddess by the damn throat and hurled her out through that gaping hole where she had infiltrated her and sealed it.
Well,
Bye,
just
Deanna.
to finish it off. Ooh,
Yeah. All right. So that officially concludes our episode. Thank you all for joining us for another episode of the Booked on Fantasy podcast. As always, we're so glad you found us. So please leave us a review and follow us on Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube to keep up with us on a daily basis. Well, that's all we've got for you guys today.
So live a little.
And we'll catch you all next week. Bye.
Bye. And stay tuned for some bloopers. I think I said what the fuck like 50 times in this set of chapters.
I was swearing a lot in this set of chapters.
Yeah. A lot of swearing like a pirate.
I know, yeah.
That was the wrong tense. Okay. Thank God for Fenris who used his teleportation magic to get Aelin to safety. Okay. I'm going to stroke out. Oh my God. Okay. And that really struck with me when I watched something in my mouth. Yuck. Okay. That was weird.
Makes an awful comment to say, did Sam die?
Shaky.
No way. Okay. Nope, he's still going. Are you done? Are you done,
like, no, I got the shakes.
Okay. The true shenanigan immediately.
I like he did a little heavy breathing at you. He's like, okay.